Peace, peace, peace. What it is your brother Tavon Sueno, aka the Orthodox Moor. And this evening, I am pleased to bring to you a very interesting conversation with a polarizing figure in the community, um, Brother Abu. We will be talking about the pews this evening, and is Arabic the best case for the language on the pews? This has been a conversation long coming, and we've been trying to set this up for a while. Um, we were going to talk before or a little after Christmas or whatnot, but ironically, a new documentary has come out that spoke on the pews a little bit, and so we thought this would be a good opportunity to come on and have this conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Abu on, and we're going to talk about the different cases for the pews, the different perspectives on the pews, the history, the arguments, or whatnot, and potentially even arguments going forward or whatnot. But without further ado, here is the good brother Abu.
Greetings and good evening to everybody.
Peace and blessings. How you doing, sir?
Very, very good, sir. Very good. And thank you for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on. And I say so because I have a lot of respect for the depth of the arguments that you make and that you bring to the table, and just your manners and whatnot. I also have a lot of respect for your perspective and whatnot. I appreciate that the other night, for instance, when people were making judgments as to whether or not other people were saved or not, you decided to step back and say, you know what, I'm going to leave that one to the sovereignty of the Most High.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. That's an important one to me. I definitely don't want to ever say that people aren't saved. That's up to God, and certainly not up to me. I really appreciate you catching that. I thought that one got drowned out.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, with that, let's set this thing up. So you've been dealing with this pew argument for a long time. So what's the history of that been like for you?
So I'm not even sure where I first I'm not sure when I first came across it, but I came across it in a Vocab's forum first, his forum on Facebook. Some people were putting that forth, and being familiar with Hebrew cursive, it fascinated me. I mean, I'm generally interested in these sorts of subjects, and so the proposition that some pews made by slaves might have Hebrew cursive on it was a fascinating statement. So I wanted to check it out. And when I looked at the pews that were available, admittedly, only a minority of the pews are available online to the best of my knowledge, I felt that I didn't see a good case for Hebrew cursive on those pews. And so what I did in Vocab's forum, I had some respectful correspondences with proponents of that view. And I was sharing with them, that my methodological concerns is the best way I could put it. It's not to say that there's definitely no language on the pews, but certainly I didn't think the case for it was good. And I had the impression that people were merely, I'm not trying to say this disrespectfully, but I think some of the people in the forum were sort of taking that position on faith. They had come across it in a documentary or on the internet, and they were simply repeating it without checking it for themselves. And so I started, sharing some of my objections. And what happened was, it was in 2019, I believe, some people started recommending specifically Kelly Richardson, that apparently they felt he had done something significant on it. So I went, I looked for a video, which mentions the pews and mentions his name. I found one. I offered what I thought was a very respectful reply, and I actually made a couple of videos. And then, from there, it sort of opened up. We unfortunately never got to have a direct conversation on it for the most part, but there's been this sort of indirect dialogue through videos, and that's going on for the last, at this point, because that was October of 2019. I'm guessing it's been about 16 months, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess I can go into more detail as to where it went from there, but I imagine some are already familiar with that. I'm not sure if you want me to rehash.
Go ahead. Feel free to go ahead.
So what happened was, in October of 2019, the second video I made, because what I had noticed is that as I tried to discuss methodology with people, a lot of the people, were not receptive to the idea. So what I decided to do was present a hypothetical case for Arabic on one of the pews. It was meant purely as a thought experiment to show how a person might go about making an argument for language on the pews. What I felt is that in order to claim that there's language on the pews, a person should get into the markings themselves, point to the markings that they feel contain language, and then start to transcribe what they believe appears there. And so I did that for Arabic purely as a thought experiment, just to show what a case for language could look like, or should look like, in my opinion. And partly I did that because the website claimed it was Arabic, and also because I had seen that Kelly Richardson had fairly forcefully stated that it's not Arabic. And so, I thought Arabic was an interesting, and also because one of the pews did frankly look like it had something resembling Arabic. And so I made that case, and I think over the next year there was some confusion about that. A number of people thought that I was actually claiming that I believe there's Arabic on the pews. A lot of people didn't appreciate that I was just trying to put forth a thought experiment, but so that became sort of a lightning rod as well in a number of these discussions. And what had happened, though, was for about 14 months, there were a number of videos mainly made by Kelly Richardson, which would get into the pews and would present themselves as responses to my own videos on the pews, or the re-uploads that other people put up, whether Vocab Malone or Faithful to God. But within those first roughly 14 months or 13 months, the impression that to be frank, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but the videos over those 13 months never got into the markings themselves. And I found that somewhat curious. But then in November, things changed. November of 2020, just this past November, things changed when Benaiah Israel he presented a case for language on the pews, which actually got into the markings. And while I disagreed with his conclusions and his interpretations, I repeatedly said that I really, and this is sincere, I really appreciated what he did, because he sort of changed the paradigm, as far as I can see, from the pro-Hebrew side. Like, I didn't know of anyone else who was publicly attempting to transcribe what appears on a pew. So from my perspective, Benaiah was the first to do that, and I really appreciated that. And then from there, there was the somewhat infamous panel discussion on the Boom Church. It was on November 22nd on the Boom Church account, which was hosted by William Brown, in which they, moving beyond attempting to show markings on the pews, they introduced the idea of deferring to scholars. And they announced that they had spoken with they had a correspondence with a scholar who's an expert in Solitreo and the Solitreo script, and he had examined one of the pews and had confirmed a sentence in the Solitreo script, a Hebrew sentence in the Solitreo script on one of the pews, and that was presented, and it created quite a lot of excitement for a lot of people. And for me, it was interesting at the time because I was familiar with the pew that they were attributing the sentence to, and the two things that stood out for me was, one, they never gave the sentence. Or three things, actually. One, they never presented the actual Hebrew sentence, but they gave a translation for it. Two, they said that this scholar, David Bunis, had confirmed the sentence, but they never showed where he confirms that sentence. And then three, being familiar with the pew, the precise sentence seemed impossible. And then when I attempted to ask them for that precise sentence, I was basically told that, that I'm not worthy to receive it. It's almost like the sentence was being embargoed from me because they were offended by my skepticism. And so that motivated me to reach out to David Bunis. And after corresponding with him, I made some subsequent videos proposing that, now that we're in the realm of deferring to scholars, that he was misrepresented rather egregiously. And then things got more controversial as there was one attempt by Kelly Richardson afterwards to look at a particular pew, the precise pew that I proposed an Arabic reading for. He proposed an alternative Solitreo reading, but that sort of got drowned out. I offered a response to that, but that got drowned out because of the controversy over a second scholar that was invoked by William Brown, who, to put it politely, doesn't... It doesn't seem like there's good grounds to believe that this scholar exists. It seems like he was invoking a fictional scholar, and that created a large amount of controversy. And then, honestly, I feel like that overshadowed the entire discussion. Like, really, I just wanted to look at markings and discuss methodologies, interpretations. But all the controversy over the scholars sort of overshadowed all of that.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand it correctly, you've gone out of your way to let people know that you're interested in a linguistic argument and not about trying to tie the pews back to an identity argument for someone being Israelite or not.
Yes, I've been saying that actually even before I had heard of Kelly Richardson. I was saying that on Vocab's forum. I think the two subjects need to be separated because first off, I see them as largely irrelevant because obviously for any language, you can have people from a variety of lineages who are knowledgeable about a language. And then, of course, specifically with, let's say, Israelites, with descendants of Jacob, you can have descendants of Jacob who do or do not know any particular language. So, a person's lineage doesn't really tell us much about, a set of markings within their environment. And so I felt they were relevant, but also another concern of mine was that it sort of poisons the well. It puts people in an emotional state where they're less receptive to discussing the markings because, if they perceive it as a personal attack on their identity claims, then they're less receptive to just, examining the markings themselves. And I felt that it's always sort of clouded things. And unfortunately, one of the great ironies is while I repeatedly requested that we separate the two out, one of the great ironies is that conflating the two resulted in the students of a man down south. I won't say where, but a gentleman who I wasn't familiar with at the time, but his students were making that conflation under the influence of the various videos online. And so when he reached out to David Bunis, he mentioned Israelites in his email. And from there, a number of people were scandalized by that. They felt that he was, trying to poison David Bunis, and other people have gone as far as claiming that this was somehow indicative of a harassment campaign. But the reality of it is that, the irony is that he did that precisely because of it's sort of like the natural progression from people constantly conflating identity and language, conflating the two questions. And as a result, his students were thinking within those terms. And so he wound up mentioning it in an email simply because it was a reflection of what he was hearing from his students. Had we kept the two subjects separate, that email probably never would have come about. And I've always felt that somewhat ironic.
Yeah. And my watching the back and forth between you and the Israelite community, I personally thought that, people weren't catching the full argument you were making and probably not even trying to listen to it because some of them might not have been trying to listen to it because they just assume because you're from another community that you're having the worst intentions and whatnot. Precisely. However, I actually tried to engage some Israelites at one point in certain chats and whatnot and try to let them know that it wasn't unthinkable that you could find Arabic on Pews during that time period, based upon the history of this country, et cetera, whatnot, and the history of slavery and where slaves are being taken from and the time period, whatnot. And I was getting some feedback like, why would it be possible, or how could it be possible that Arabic could be found in a Christian church at that time period? And at that juncture, I recognized that there was a certain amount of information that might not be common to people or whatnot that need to be touched on or whatnot. Not only that, I have the luxury of having a good brother who's in the chat, Anonymous Hebrew, who went down to Savannah in August of 2019 and put his hands on the pews and went through the tour and talked to the people there and took his own pictures of the pews or whatnot. He also reads Hebrew, etc. And he went in thinking that, now this is interesting. He went in thinking he was going to find just Hebrew on the pews or whatnot based upon what he heard. Like what you're talking about, like the oral tradition is that typically the older oral tradition that you're going to find in the Israelite community is that it's cursive Hebrew on those pews, right? So that's what he had heard, and then he went in there, and he came out saying something completely different. He's like, okay, I see a couple of characters that could be Hebrew, but I'm also seeing things that could look like Arabic. I'm also seeing things that could look like et cetera, whatnot. So we had long discussions on that. I got to look at the pews or whatnot, or his pictures of the pews or whatnot. He has recordings of his tour guide speaking about the pews and speaking about the potentiality of Hebrew in other languages and a trade language and codes, etc., whatnot. And so we were able to make we made our own assessments separate, completely separate, not even having known about the Boom Church or Pastor Kelly at that time. And we were actually making plans to interview the tour guide or whatnot, but Anonymous Hebrew and I were involved in the debate league at the time, and so we put stuff on the back burner. Fast forward, we see everything going on between you and Pastor Kelly and Maury Brown, etc., whatnot, and we decided to weigh in so we could kind of broaden the scope a little bit, so we can make sure honest arguments are being heard and the best information is getting out as much as possible on the matter. So we went forth and made the videos that we made on the matter, and I think you weighed in on those videos as well.
Yeah, and I actually really appreciated the two videos that you did. especially the first one. I've told a number of people this. I was planning on making a video on the plausibility of Arabic, not based on markings, but instead based on the fact that there were slaves, not only in the Americas in general, but specifically in the South in the mid 19th century, who were able to write in Arabic, and that we have evidence of that. I was thinking of doing that, and what I tell people is, then you came out with your video before I made mine, and at this point I tell people, look, just watch Orthodox Moor segment on that, because I think you covered it beautifully,
No, many thanks. So fast forward to now, there's been a new okay, hold on, let me touch on this. So in between those conversations, there was a documentary made known by Garfield talking about Ephraim Isaac and other people looking at the pews and giving their assessments and whatnot. And that documentary was bought by Cryptic Quest, and it was bought by the University of Cincinnati, I believe. And it's kind of been put on ice, like people haven't seen it in the public or whatnot. And so, there's been some back and forth on that. And then there's a new documentary that came out from PBS with Henry Louis Gates Jr. talking about the history of the Black Church, to where he touches on the pews. So did you want to touch on that or no? Yeah,
sure. I mean, that documentary is fascinating. I wish, well, there's two documentaries you mentioned. Alvin Elmore's Cryptic Quest, which was made years ago, and I've only seen parts of, is certainly fascinating. It's a fascinating documentary, and he, like you said, he got the Ephraim Isaac to go down there and look at the pews in person, and then he apparently also brought pictures to Richard Saracen, who's a scholar of Hebrew at Hebrew Union College, and so that was fascinating. And then Henry Louis Gates has this new documentary that just came out on PBS last week titled "The Black Church," and in the earlier part of the documentary, they do a very brief segment on First African Baptist Church, in which he brought another scholar from a linguist from Harvard, who also concluded, independently of everyone else, that some of these pews contain some at least Arabic script. But unfortunately, the documentary didn't propose a reading. I'm hoping to reach out to that particular scholar, which was Boubacar Diakite, and get him and see if I can, ask him if there was a specific reading he settled on, and maybe even share with him the conclusions of others and see if he finds those plausible or implausible.
What were your thoughts and positions on the first documentary with Dr. Saracen and Ephraim Isaac?
I thought it was. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
I was going to say, I thought, from what I saw, I thought it was fascinating. It takes some interesting proposals. It argues, from what I saw, I mean, there might be a lot that I'm missing, that it also gets into the relationship between the slaves that were there in Savannah and the nearby Jewish community. And it proposes that if there's Hebrew on the pews, it may have been influenced by the Jewish community. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if Karen Wortham comes up in there, but Karen Wortham has argued that one of a very prominent member of Savannah's Jewish community, his grandson, I believe that comes up in the documentary, his grandson wound up at First African Baptist Church, a grandson who was the son of a child that was conceived out of marriage, whatever the case. But just having those two scholars, Ephraim Isaac and Richard Saracen, was interesting. I know it's generated a lot of excitement now that Ephraim Isaac appears to propose some Ge'ez characters for the pews. And so that sort of enters a new paradigm. As for Henry Louis Gates documentary, I was looking forward to it. And then when I found out he's going to do a segment on the pews and have a Harvard linguist, examine one of them and say that, Arabic is on it, I was definitely looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I felt the segment was very short. I expected it to be short, but it was even shorter than I had anticipated. And unfortunately, because, it's a small part of a much broader discussion, they didn't spend much time, on the subject, on the parts that would be interesting to me, which would be the markings and how you interpret them and what you think you see there.
So what's your position on the potentiality of Ge'ez being on the pews, and what Ephraim Isaac had to say about that?
Oh, well, for any language, I'm never going to deny the possibility or the potentiality of language. So I certainly believe it's possible, or there's a potential for Ge'ez to be on there. But my position in general remains that I personally do not believe. Now, and then let me say up front, this is very much a fallible position, and I've always been open to the arguments of others that could lead to an opposite conclusion. But I remain skeptical about any language being on the pews. As for specifically Efrem Isaac's approach, the way I would put it is, it's now, keep in mind that happened years before I got involved in the subject, and even if he didn't, there's no reason for him to be aware of my little YouTube videos. But the approach he was taking was somewhat different from the approach I was taking, where I do put emphasis on the need to sort of transcribe words and phrases, because I think when you're just pointing to markings that look like individual characters, if you don't have the context of a phrase, it's much more open to interpretation, and there's a higher possibility of false positives, is the way I would put it.
Okay. Interesting concept. So I heard you talking on Faithful to God's channel about those potential false positives, and you were showing some Facebook pictures about what those potential false positives could be. Are you interested in covering those for the people or no?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because one of the interesting things is, I'm not sure if a lot of people noticed this, but Efrem Isaac proposed Ge'ez characters for two different pews. And one of them happened to be the exact same pew which Benaiah Israel had proposed. Yes, precisely. Here we go. So these are the markings. Now there's more to it, but I like focusing on this because that portion right there is what Efrem Isaac proposed two Ge'ez characters, and then he said there's a possibility of something resembling a third. But the main two characters are at the top, what looks like sort of like a letter C facing the opposite direction. He proposed that's Ha, and then underneath that would be Sha or Sa, right? The south and the Hay, roughly speaking. And so, but these happen to be the exact same markings that Benaiah Israel proposed were two Hebrew chets, the eighth character of the Hebrew alphabet, in the Solitreo script, and also in a standard cursive, Hebrew cursive. That's also the way the chet will look. And so he proposed two chets. And then, interestingly enough, some people, after it was brought out that David Bunis was misrepresented when it was claimed that he endorsed an entire sentence, some people said, well, at the very least, he did suggest a Hebrew word on those pews. And I corresponded with David Bunis about that. And regarding him proposing the word Israel, he confirmed what I had speculated, which is that he based that on only two characters, the markings resembling two characters, and his mind filling in the rest. And it just so happens that what Efrem Isaac proposed was Ha and Sa, and Benaiah Israel proposed was two chets. David Bunis was seeing a single character there. He was seeing a Hebrew shin or sin, because it was in Yisrael. And so we have a situation where three different people are looking at the same markings, and they're seeing rather different things from different scripts. And for me, that was fascinating. And I do feel that you could even propose other things, even Latin characters for those, at least for those two markings on the left.
Yeah, hold on real quick, because as a matter of fact, I got all that stuff up here. I got your pictures. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so yeah, those are the Ge'ez characters that were proposed by Efrem Isaac. So this is the way he was looking at it. And as I said, we already covered that. So if you want to jump to the next slide, if you turn it 180 degrees, you can get two other Ge'ez characters, right? Which is the Ba on the left and Ta, which corresponds to the Hebrew Tet on the right. So even within the paradigm of Ge'ez, we can, propose different characters depending on which ways we're looking at it. But he had proposed Ha and Sa, right? And then if you go to the...
Nope, I went too far. Hold on.
No problem. And so this is where I propose that that honestly, and I'm not trying to be, facetious or disrespectful, but honestly, when you look at it this way, it does look like even Latin characters. It looks like E on top and C on the bottom. And then if you go to the next slide will show what Benaiah Israel saw, which is two chets. Now, the chets I put there are square, but, in cursive, they're a little bit more rounded. And something that's fascinating for me is in that Boom Church panel discussion from November 22nd, Benaiah Israel even said at one point, he said something to the effect of, you don't have to be an expert in Hebrew to know that the markings that go like this, and he moved his finger in the form of a chet, and he said, is that character right there? So he was saying that some of the letters, not all of them, he was saying some of the characters are obvious, and he referred specifically to these markings, saying that while others might be open to interpretation, he felt it was obvious that these are two heads.
Okay. Example 5.
Right, and this was this is what David Boonis saw. He saw, on the larger pew. Now, keep in mind, he said that he didn't see these characters when it was unmarked. He felt he could only see it when it was marked because Benaiah had highlighted them. But he felt when he looked at it, this portion looked like a sin. I had speculated that that's what the case was, that he saw a sin and a lamed, and then his mind filled in the rest. And when I wrote to him and shared that with him, he told me that as he recalls it, that's correct. So he saw a sin here, which is, in other words, what are proposed to be two characters is proposed to be one. And this sort of just repeats the point. Like it also looks like the Latin W and U, like if we make if we put emphasis on that line inside the character, it looks like a horseshoe on the left. It also could look like, aside from Ge'ez characters, it could look like Latin characters, that could be a W and a U.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing, N and M, depending on your handwriting, and this is the other pew that Ephraim Isaac looked at, where he proposed Ri on the left, right, and then Sa and Ha. So the two characters on the left are the same characters that he felt he saw on another pew, and then that character there on the left, which looks a bit like an L or a backwards J, is Ri. Is Ri. So the equivalent of the Reish, but vocalized with an E sound. And I felt that, you could turn that and see something, completely different, even in terms of Ge'ez characters.
Mm-hmm.
But the same sort of issue is there, that it looks like, that could be hypothetically L, W, U. And then if I assume you have one more where we rotate it 180, even here, it's sort of, again, you get the N and the M, maybe a 7, but also these are other Ge'ez characters. This is
Ba, Ta, and Ga.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And that pretty much covers it. And so that's why I feel that, and this is a double-edged sword, I should say. The analogy I would give is, imagine if I drew a circle on a piece of paper. Now, in a vacuum, it's hard to know how I intended that circle. I could have intended it simply as a circle or as a Latin letter O, or I could have intended it as a Ge'ez ayin or a Phoenician ayin, because in the Phoenician script, what we call what many people call the Paleo Hebrew script, the ayin is an O, essentially a circle, and so it goes both ways. It's possible for a person to intend a marking as a Ge'ez character or a Paleo Hebrew character, or any other kind of character, and without the person who made the marking no longer present, and us not knowing their intention, the evidence might not be there to conclude that that's how they intended it, even if they did. So it goes both ways. It could be that they simply intended it as a circle, and someone interprets it as a Ge'ez character or a Phoenician character or whatever, and they did not intend it that way. But then, of course, the reverse is true. You could have a situation where we're saying there's no evidence he intended it that way, but it's still possible that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say a phrase helps us, anchor a marking, and we're less likely to come up with a false positive. So to use again that analogy of a circle, if that circle is part of the phrase "I love my mother" and the circle is the O in mother, we know how it's intended within that context. Or if it's a phrase like if you write in the Phoenician script, or some call it the Paleo Hebrew script, if you write out the Shema, Shema Yisrael, etc., the ayin, that circle will appear there. If you see it in that context, you know how it was intended. But when it's standing by itself, there's so many possibilities, and that's what opens the door to a higher probability of false positives.
Yeah. So as I understand it, you reached out to a number of different scholars to look on the situation, also to reach out to see what their methodology was, right? Including the person, the scholar from Harvard on the PBS documentary, correct?
Yes, unfortunately, I have yet to reach him. So I haven't been able to reach Boubacar Diakite, which was the scholar who appears in Gates' documentary, The Black Church, but I am hoping to do so soon. But yeah, I did reach out to a number of... Me personally, though, I actually, while scholarly input is always welcome, for me, I never really wanted to put emphasis on the scholars, because I think people made a number... People on both sides, actually, made a mistake in trying to defer, too strongly to the scholars who are saying, who they feel are saying things that they like. for me, it's even if it's a scholar weighing in, what's most important is the argument. And I think, one point, and there's many things I appreciated in your videos on the pews. One thing that I really appreciated was when you said regarding Richard Katz that, putting aside the controversy about his existence, even if he is, a serious scholar, one remains within their rights to raise objections, to raise doubts about his methodology. And that was a point that you raised, and I really appreciate that point because I think it applies across the board. That it's a point that I've tried to make is that scholars are not high priests who hand out dogma. Rather, their own positions can be subject to methodological questions. How did they reach their conclusions, and
exactly.
How strong is the evidence in favor of those conclusions?
Exactly. So, okay, in that vein, did you by chance reach out to Dr. Ephraim Isaac to understand his methodology as to why he was saying Gaez was on the pews in terms of...
No, I have not. I'm thinking about reaching out to Richard Saracen. I have not reached out to Ephraim Isaac because it's my understanding he's very old now. That documentary is itself quite old, even though most of us didn't know about it. It's quite old. And Ephraim Isaac is now, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's in his late 80s. I've thought about it. Interestingly, I have family in Princeton. Apparently, he's currently in Princeton. So every time I'm out there recently, I've thought about, man, it'd be interesting if I could speak with him in person, but I have not attempted to reach out to him yet, just because I imagine he's, I've found that with the much older scholars, it's you're less likely to get a response, but I haven't reached out to him yet, but I've thought about it. Like, for example, as you know, Suhaib Webb recommended I reach out to Akbar Ahmed, who did some work on Sapelo Island, on the Muslim community in Sapelo Island. I reached out to him and I got no response, and I suspect that the reason is the same. He's a much older gentleman. I think he's also in his 80s.
Yeah, something that I appreciate is the fact that you've actually reached out to multiple scholars on this topic to get, and I don't know if you were attempting to do this, but in doing so, we're able to get a better idea of what the consensus is on the topic or whatnot, or what kind of consensus can be reached on the topic from the different views we're getting.
What I've done is mainly focused on the Arabic. I haven't done much. I mean, I did reach out to Bunis to discuss his views, and I guess you could say I reached out to Katz, but with considerable skepticism preceding the composition of that first email. But most of my reaching out to different scholars or prominent Muslims, in the case of Suhaib Webb, was to discuss Arabic, and I wanted to see that. And that was partly because a number of people who were hostile to the idea of Arabic on the pews, and some who had mistaken my view for being a view, arguing that Arabic is on the pews, challenged me to reach out to the scholars, and so, and also because William Brown and Kelly Richardson were saying that with Richard Katz, they have a scholar who's saying definitively that there is no Arabic on the pews. And I found that, even the controversy about Katz aside, I found that claim, as you've alluded to, so did you, methodologically curious,
Yeah, I went so far as to say that statement, that claim is actually a stronger claim than proving that there's Hebrew on the pews. That's a negative claim, right? So there's a positive claim being made on some sides and a negative claim being made on others. Like, so there is Hebrew or there is not Arabic, etc. Whatnot, right?
And that there's definitely not any Arabic, because I imagine that they send him pictures of every single pew. That's first off, and immediately my question was, even before I was convinced by Faithful to God to question the existence of Katz, my immediate question was, well, what markings were shown to this man? When I saw that, and that was one of my first impressions from seeing when Katz was invoked, was that they don't really show the precise markings that were shown to him, and so it sort of all I could do was sort of throw my hands up. That was my initial reaction.
Yeah, and let's say one assumes that they were sent the basic pictures that everyone sees and whatnot, right? So there's at least that one pew that does look like it, potentially Arabic, etc. So I was curious to find out, like, so what methodology was he going through to stipulate that there was definitely no Arabic? Given the fact, like, so let's say he had seen the pew, just assuming he'd seen the pew, right? If you see that pew that looks, the one that's in the PBS documentary, etc. If you see that pew and they say that there's definitely no Arabic on the pews, then I'm definitely questioning your bona fides, particularly given the time, particularly given the people involved. Given there's a lot of history documenting Arabic amongst the slaves, particularly Fulani slaves and whatnot, and we know that there's Fulanis in the area. So to me, it was a fantastic claim actually to stipulate there's no Arabic on the pews, because he said plural. He didn't say singular, right? So to me, it seemed like he'd seen a multitude of pews or whatnot.
Yeah, and when when Faithful to God started to propose to me that maybe I should have some doubts about this appeal to Richard Katz, that was when I started looking into it. That was one of the things that sort of created alarm bells for me, is that that our sole source for this scholar have the scholar saying precisely what they, even before reaching out to him, what they wanted the conclusion to be. And that sort of raised alarm bells for me. Like it was, a gentleman who was insistent that there's no Arabic on the pews, and he's the sole source for this scholar who's now confirming his position, and I remember thinking, that's like the first of a very minor, but it was the first among the early red flags for me.
Right. So I heard a lot of people saying that they believe that Katz doesn't exist or didn't exist, and where's Dr. Katz, all them kind of things. So for me, I don't have any information to stipulate he does or does not exist. I don't even care about that part. If he does exist and he's a scholar and he's enough of a scholar that he can turn down, or he can flat out say that it's not Arabic on the pews and all that, then he should have a fingerprint of some sort. Scholastically, we can go find or whatnot. So you don't have to bring him on for an interview. You don't have to bring him on for a phone call. You should be able to point me to an article just to show that he exists. Yeah,
exactly. His writings, exactly. I mean, an established professor, presumably the way they described him, I assume they were referring to a professor with tenure. It's nigh impossible. It's nearly impossible to receive tenure, to become an established professor without publishing anything. One would assume he would have work.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, and that's a fair point. I agree that I never felt like insisting that they have to, show him or have an interview with him or anything like that. It was more just to, give us some, evidence of his existence by pointing to his writings, which is exactly what you said,
Yeah. And to be clear for my family, I will restate here what I've always stipulated on here and other channels, that for my family, Maury Brown and Pastor Kelly, etc. Like if we're expected to die on the hill of Dr. Katz, then I at least have to see an article from him. Mm. But beyond that, I'm going to say this: if you can show me an article, I'm going to tell you to throw it away anyway, because his scholarship is garbage.
Well, yeah, yes. Even if he existed, we, at the very least, the most polite way I can put it is that we continue to have the right to question his claims, which, the propositions that were attributed to Richard Katz seem, they don't seem to have tremendous support. That was, the position.
I'm going to say that again. I said it before. I'll say it again. To me, his scholarship was sloppy. It was extremely sloppy. And so, I don't know if my brothers are getting taken for a ride, etc. I can't call it. I don't got that information. What I do know is, if the man is real, I'm not taking him. I'm not really listening to what he has to say on the matter, unless he provides me methodology. Okay, so Abu, you sent an email and he sent you a reply, and from what I recalled in the reply, what I saw in the video, he took more sentences to explain why he would not address the issue than would have taken to actually address the issue.
Yeah, and yes, and basically, giving the reason for why he can't get into it. He's too busy, etc. And then the email they showed subsequently about how, he's going to leave the scene, and his email is going to become inactive. A lot of that seemed it seemed all designed to basically reach the conclusion that this scholar cannot be questioned and cannot be reached. He's not going to be receptive to sharing any details about his methodology, his line of his reasoning.
Yeah. So for my Israelite family, understand this. Like, so let's say he does exist. He left y'all hanging. He left you hanging when you needed him to show his face, or when you needed him to show his
case.
Yeah, his methodology. Yeah. He told you something was, he told you, he gave you a full positive, this is what it is, but didn't tell you why and how, and didn't give you a way to prove it yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's problematic for us.
And what's alarming for me is even if we put aside the question of his existence, it's sort of the controversy, results in there's no more discussion on, for example, what pew was shown to him, where precisely he allegedly saw what he saw, and so like I would love to still discuss that with proponents of the view that he had that was attributed to him. I would love to see that, but it seems like everything was just dropped as in response to the controversy.
Yeah, I'm at this juncture. I don't even care about Bunis or Katz or what they got to say on the matter, because they don't want to be involved in the matter, right? I'm worried about who does want to be involved and who is actually saying stuff. So
to be fair, regarding Bunis, people have said that he said he doesn't want to be involved. What he specifically asked was that Brown not cite him as a supporting source. So he didn't necessarily say don't quote him in any capacity. It was just he wanted to make clear that he shouldn't be cited as supporting what Brown had attributed to him, as I interpreted it on that Boom Church panel discussion. Yeah, I think what he did right is relevant.
And right, and what you said about the Bunis situation, like, so we're not privy to the original emails, so we don't know everything he saw, how he saw it, in that manner. So to me, it's water under the bridge. I'll throw that out.
Mm-hmm.
What is interesting to me, though, is that you've gotten responses back from other scholars that you've reached out to.
Yes.
And they're, well, let me just, if you don't mind, let me play a couple of video clips from your video, that the short clips where you reach out to the scholars, and then I can show the pictures of the recent ones that you've given me,
mm-hmm.
and then we can talk about that. And also, before don't let me forget, we got to address that question about afterwards about you potentially painting yourself into the corner that we talked about before.
Yes.
Because I know we definitely got to address that one, but yeah.
Oh, definitely, and I think a number of people would want you to do so. Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism.
Yes, sir. So these are the so okay, family. Here we go. Here's a couple video clips about from Abu and his videos about the scholars he's reached out to in their responses.
Case because a number of the supporters of Richardson and Brown kept asking me where my scholars are or which scholars I had reached out to, I decided that, if they insist, I can at least send out a few emails to a few different professors. So, and that's what I did. To each professor I wrote to, I sent 2 images. The first image I attached was of this particular pew from this angle. As you might have noticed, this is precisely the pew Kelly Richardson and I gave competing interpretations for, as I offered a hypothetical Arabic interpretation of the markings, and he offered a solitreo interpretation. This is covered in detail in my previous video. The second image I attached to each email was this one, which is the same pew, just with some highlights added to guide the eyes, so to speak. Along with those images, I sent each professor the exact same email text, which read as follows, quote, "Forgive the intrusion of this email. In Savannah, Georgia, USA, there is a church, First African Baptist Church, which has pews which were built by slaves. On the outside of the pews which those slaves built are a number of markings. Some have claimed that the markings might be Hebrew, and others have claimed that the markings might be Arabic. Recently, someone has suggested that one pew might even have material from the Quran, but the person who made that suggestion is not any sort of expert in Quranic Arabic. I am writing to ask if you might offer some insight here. I have attached 2 images. The first image simply shows a pew unhighlighted. The second image shows the same pew with highlights as part of one person's attempt to elucidate what might be there. Nota bene, the portion on the right in the second image is in a different color because one person suggested that it might be the end of a different sentence. Could you tell me if, in your opinion, that looks to you or to any of your colleagues like it could be Hebrew, or if it looks like it could be Arabic, and if it might be the latter, if there is any possibility of it resembling anything in the Quran, and if you feel there might be any discernible language in the markings, whether Hebrew or Arabic or something else, are you or anyone you know able to suggest a possible translation? Apologies again for the intrusion. Thanks in advance for any help in this matter. Sincerely, AA." End quote. So I received multiple replies, and the first email that I'd like to show is the reply I received from Samar Ali, professor of Arabic at the University of Michigan. His response reads as follows, quote, "Thanks for reaching out, and this is super interesting. It looks like Arabic in the West African script, and it could very well be a 3-word snippet of chapter 114 of the Quran, which nearly every Muslim would know and use for ritual prayer. I can't be certain without more context, but it looks like Al-Nas, Ilahil Nas, humanity, the God of humanity. from the middle of that chapter. The whole text of chapter 114 is very short. In the name of God, merciful to all, compassionate to each, I seek refuge with the Lord of humanity, the King of humanity, the God of humanity, who whispers in the hearts of humanity, of jinn and humanity. Besides prayer, it's used in stressful or frightening situations to summon God's protection. Let me know if I can be of any further help. End quote. So while this professor, Samar Ali, said he is not certain, he does say that it looks like it could be a West African rendering of a few words from the last chapter of the Quran, precisely the chapter I had appealed to when I proposed an Arabic reading for this pew. Also worthy of note, his point that this text was memorized and recited in particular by those in stressful or frightening situations could loan itself well to the idea of this being a text which certain slaves had memorized. Now let me show you another couple of emails, with in particular one with a more definitive answer. This one is from Geoffrey Khan, who is the current Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge in England. The Regius Professor, or Regius if you want, you can say Regius. The Regius Professorship of Hebrew at Cambridge is a Hebrew chair established by the King of England 480 years ago. So this is a serious Hebraist, and he also studies and teaches Arabic. So Professor Khan's initial reply to my email was as follows, quote, "Thank you very much for your message and for the photos of the pews in Savannah. The writing is Arabic and contains verses 2 and 3 from the final chapter or surah of the Quran. The text visible in the photo reads in Arabic, Sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind. When do you think this was written on the pews? Was it written by the slaves who built it? Best wishes, Geoffrey." End quote. So I wrote back to Professor Khan with the following, quote, "Greetings, Professor Khan. Thank you very much for your reply. Regarding your question, I do not know for certain when the markings were made. The only thing I have is the church's oral tradition, which posits that the same slaves who made the pews were the ones who made those markings. Ergo, assuming that is correct, the markings would date to the 1850s. I really appreciate you sharing your conclusion regarding what appears in those markings. Forgive me if this question is somewhat redundant, but just to be clear, would you say it is definitely Arabic and not Hebrew? The context of my question is the alternate suggestions which have floated around, some positing that the markings should be Arabic and others positing that the markings should be Hebrew. Sincerely, AA." End quote. In response to that, Professor Khan wrote a second reply, which read in part as follows, quote, "The writing is clearly Arabic and is clearly from the Quran, the final surah, Surat al-Nas. It is certainly not Hebrew," end quote. Now, seeing how Richardson, Brown, and others treated the alleged positions of Boonis and Katz, can you imagine how they would react if Cambridge's Hebrew chair said that the markings are clearly Hebrew and certainly not Arabic? I think we can all agree that they would declare that the debate is finished and the matter is closed. So this begs the question, now that I have an email from Cambridge's Regius Professor of Hebrew saying that the markings are clearly Arabic and certainly not Hebrew, should I play the same game? Should I say that the debate is closed and that mere students cannot say anything in response? Of course not. The reason why is because, as I said, that is not how academia works. No scholar would want me going around telling people that they cannot ask questions, or that they cannot raise objections, or that they cannot investigate the matter for themselves. This email does not have to end the discussion, and it especially should not be a tool, used to try to silence students of language. And, to drive this point home, let me share a third email. This one is from Mohsen Gudarzi, an assistant professor of Near Eastern Studies at the University of Minnesota. His email takes a different approach. His email reads in part as follows, quote, "Thank you for your email. I've looked at the images carefully, and I don't believe they contain Arabic writing. Now, it is not impossible for the markings to represent a highly cursive, idiosyncratic, and or local form of Arabic script. Someone with expertise in West African Islam could be a better judge of this. Nor is it impossible to read into them certain recognizable phrases from the Quran. I can read into them 2 phrases, in fact. But these would constitute imposition of a text upon the markings, which can be done basically with any set of sufficiently complex traces," end quote. Now, I imagine at this point, some might be thinking, wait, what? Why would you share that email? You should have ended it with the email from the professor at Cambridge. But I would prefer that we at least try to be somewhat intellectually honest. Moreover, I think Professor Gudarzi's email is helpful. there is a real possibility of an imaginative mind making connections based on familiar features and patterns while looking at something which is actually random or naturally occurring. And one can read up on, things like pareidolia and apophenia for more on this possibility. Finally, let's be honest. What sorts of replies we might get from certain professors can also be influenced by what precise images are shown, how those images are highlighted, and how the questions are worded. So there are multiple layers of interpretation and influence at play in these exercises. For example, try writing to different professors with this image, without any highlights, noting that some claim Hebrew appears on the pew and others claim Arabic appears on the pew, while also clearly saying up front that one other possibility is that these are just random or naturally occurring markings, like medullary rays or scratches, made at random. I think we all know that we're unlikely to get too many replies declaring that to clearly be Hebrew or Arabic if that approach is taken. On that note, I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on the recent appeals to scholars, and I really am looking forward to the comments of others, and I'm looking forward to see where this discussion goes from here. On that note, God bless.
Subsequently, you also reached out to a few other scholars, to which we'll see here. Hold on. There we go. So, yeah, you reached out to Dr. Mirza Khan from the University of Notre Dame.
Mahan Mirza. I think his nickname is Mahan Mirza.
Did I get the wrong scholar?
No, you have the right scholar. The name is Mahan Mirza. So
my
it's
fault.
okay. No worries.
I did get it messed up. Okay, my fault. But Mirza holds
it.
Right, yeah, my fault. Yeah, you're 100% correct. I see it now. But yeah, he holds a BS in mechanical engineering from University of Texas at Austin, a master's from Harvard Seminary, and a PhD in religious studies from Yale University. So he went on to stipulate this. Do you want to read it or no?
Sure, I can read it. So he wrote, "This is very interesting. It's hard for me to tell, and I'm not an expert in the area. Both photos seem to have a sin, i.e. the Arabic letter sin, at the end. The one that is multicolored has something resembling a law before it in red. If I were to venture a guess, the last phrase in that photo might say Ilah al-Nas, which means the Lord of humankind, a verse in the last surah of the Quran, which is a prayer for protection from evil whisperings. I suggest you float this on academic listserv for Islam AAR." And then he goes on to recommend some other scholars. I have not reached out to those scholars yet. If I may comment very quickly about what he wrote.
Yeah.
I do think it's significant, first off, that he saw two cases of the letter sin, because I myself, feel that there are two markings that look like the letter sin, and that came up in my video on the case for Arabic Revisited. And, him stating that it looks like it says Ilahin Nas, which is the precise phrase that I arrived at in my hypothetical case, and it's also the phrase that Joffrey Khan and Samad Ali arrived at. It's interesting to note that he's arriving at that independently of the rest of us, So in a sense, it becomes another set of eyes from a person who's familiar with the Quran and familiar with Arabic, saying that, it looks to him like it says Ilahin Nas. So I thought that was at least somewhat significant.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. And that's important for people to understand. What he's saying is that, again, one more time, that he's coming to that conclusion independent of what other people have said, in Reddit, etc., whatnot. He's not connected to what they saw when they saw it. He doesn't know that they saw it. He's reading this independently.
Yeah, I should add, I didn't share the emails with one another. Like, I never shared Joffrey Khan's emails with Mahan Mirza or anything like that. So they're all sort of making these assessments in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. So next, we have Dr. Khamr Dagli. He's at Holy Cross University. He holds a master's from George Washington University's Department of Religion and a PhD from Princeton University's Department of Near Eastern Studies. And this is what he had to say about it. You're going to break that down.
Sure. He says, "Hello, I cannot make anything out of it from the right that one double-bellied could be the name of God, Allah. But really, it's hard to tell. With your permission, I could post it to my networks online and see if anyone can help." I wound up writing back to him, asking him to, by all means, share it and let me know what responses he gets. I haven't yet to receive a response in that regard. I do think his opinion is significant because he's one of the people who did work on the study Quran, the a fairly new translation that's generated a lot of excitement. It's a very interesting and I think a quite well done translation, the study Quran, and he was one of the people who worked on that. So he certainly he's essentially a translator of Quranic Arabic, or he's done some work in the realm of translating Quranic Arabic. So he's in a good position to assess this sort of thing.
I would like to have a good discussion with him about Surah 4, Ayat 34. Anyway, moving forward, I thought this was an interesting submission here. So this man is not technically a scholar, but he is an American Muslim convert from Christianity. His name is Imam Saeed Webb. He studied Arabic and Islamic studies at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And so for those who don't know, that's not a small thing. That's a pretty prestigious university in the Islamic world, etc. So it's not like he's a layman by any means, but he's not technically what we would identify as a scholar in this country on the matter. However, this is what he says on the matter.
He said, "This is remarkable. I will have a look, but I also encourage you to track down academics who have done research on the subject. I'm aware of Professor Akbar Ahmed, who has done some extensive work on the topic, and then he had recommended a video that Akbar Ahmed had done while visiting Sapelo Island in Georgia, which may come up later in this discussion."
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then at the bottom he conceded. He says it's difficult to make out, and he asked if I have any other images, any better images. I did send him other images of other pews, and he didn't respond. I'm guessing he didn't see anything on those other pews either.
Yeah. So I'm glad you did this, because this adds to the consensus, and I'm glad that Dr. Dagley will be able to put that information out to his network, and we can get even more information back.
And I may reach out to the scholars that Mahan Mirza had recommended as well. I actually intended to, so I haven't got around to it yet. But he recommended 2 other scholars who may be of assistance.
So here's the $64,000 question. Has Abu painted himself into a corner? On the one hand, he's saying that there's no discernible language on the pews. On the other hand, it seems like because of his own work, research, legwork, all that a bunch of scholars are saying, you know what? This looks like it's potentially Arabic on the pews, like a discernible language with the phrase and all that. A recognizable phrase from the Quran that Muslims would know and say in a situation of distress, etc.
Yeah, this is Dante Fortson has raised precisely this criticism that now there are scholars saying there's Arabic on the pews, and then you have lowly me, a person who's not a scholar, saying that I still remain skeptical about language on the pews. As I've mentioned elsewhere, I believe Faithful to God has told me that with regards to that specific pew, he's reached the point where he would lean more towards scholars like Jafri Khan than defer to lowly me, who is not a scholar. So yes, I think a number of people feel that the case for Arabic is quite strong, and I myself would say that amongst the different cases for different languages, it seems that Arabic has the strongest case thus far. Now things can change in the future, and so yes, there is some irony in the fact that some of this was brought out by me, who happens to be a skeptic about Arabic remaining on the pews. What I would say is I do believe there's still wiggle room, and I think those scholars like Gudarzi and Kanardali and Suhaib Webb, as you said, we wouldn't consider him necessarily a scholar of Quranic Arabic, but he's a graduate of Al-Azhar, and that's significant. I think there is at least some wiggle room. There's still some room for skepticism, but yeah, I think it's a fair criticism, that Dante's brought up, that it does look awkward at this point, that the case for Arabic seems to be swelling and getting so strong that it seems to sort of be falling over even on me,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a fair criticism, to be honest, but I do insist that I do believe there remains some wiggle room for doubt.
Now, when I talked to Anonymous about this, I asked him how many pews there were with markings on them, and so from what I understand, that there's 2 sections of pews in the balconies, and they both have markings, and they have markings on both sides, in both balconies, and that there's upwards of 17 to 20 different pews in each balcony. So there's potentially, and there's 2 panels to each pew.
So 40 panels, possibly.
Potentially 80 panels.
Oh, okay. I miscounted. Okay.
No,
Wow.
yeah, potentially 40 pews with 80 panels.
Mm.
So right now, as it seems like there's a strong case for Arabic on that one panel of that one pew.
Yes.
Are you saying that's the best case for all pews or just that one pew?
Oh, it would have to be for just that one pew. I mean, as we sort of alluded to earlier, I think it seems like the same half dozen or so images are just continuously being cycled on the internet. And there's, as you just alluded to, there's a larger number of, panels that we have not seen, that are not on the internet, that I haven't seen. And so, of course, I can't say like this applies to all the pews, which is why I said thus far, like based on the arguments that have come out. Now, for all we know, I mean, someone might look at the rest of the pews and see, anything. It could be clear Ge'ez, it could be Hebrew, it could be Ladino, it could be Spanish in the Latin script. Who knows? But the point is that, no, I can't obviously speak on the matter of pews that I have not seen. So what I'm saying is thus far, emphasis on thus far, of the different cases for different languages. Right now, Arabic has the strongest case if one is going to insist on language on the pews. And that's because the cases for other languages are based on individual characters, while the case for Arabic right now it's the one language that has an argument for a coherent phrase. And as you pointed out, a phrase from one of the most well-known, piece of Arabic literature in history. And it also, since a number of people wanted the opinions of scholars and wanted to defer to scholars, we have multiple scholars saying that there's Arabic text on the pews, and we have at least 2 who have suggested, one very strongly suggesting that it's a particular Quranic verse, and then 2 other scholars who somewhat more hesitantly suggested the exact same reading. And that is, in that sense, there's more support for Arabic than any of the other languages at present thus far. But of course, things could change as we see more pews and more people examine them and so on.
Yeah, so you would agree that we would need to examine every panel and every pew to be able to give a proper understanding as to what each panel says, and we shouldn't extrapolate what's on one panel to another panel, etc.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, and I'm not intending to say this disrespectfully. Kelly Richardson on multiple occasions has said that he has pictures of all the pews. And it's my understanding that when people go on that tour, they kind of get to see a few and then they're taken downstairs. He had something a little bit more akin to carte blanche. And so he's said that he has pictures of all the pews. What I would say is, if he's listening to this, I would ask him to put those pictures out, release them. And I believe he's alluded to the fact that specifically I am not worthy to see these images, but it's not just about me. It would be, for the public. Make it available to the public so multiple people could, examine them and discuss them. That's what I would ask him to do.
Yeah, and the second that, when I talked to Anonymous, he let me know that when he went on the tour, that he was only able to see one side. Like he didn't.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from multiple people. Yeah, you get to see one side, and then they bring you back downstairs.
Yeah, the side that was shown in the PBS documentary with the potential Arabic on the one pew. Quick question, and then I'm gonna get to the PBS documentary. So there's a couple other positions, like the potentiality of a potential trade language, potential ciphers and codes, etc. What's your positions on those?
I wouldn't know how to address that. Like with regards to a code, in my very first video, I said that if the argument that I was making applies to people who feel that there's clear and discernible language on the pews. And then I said, if somebody's saying that it's something more esoteric, then obviously that becomes a much more difficult, and my argument doesn't really apply to it. So I'm uncertain how to assess whether or not there are codes on it. But I think the only thing I can say is that if someone wants to propose that, I would invite them to sort of present their case. Like, what exactly is this code that you believe appears on certain pews? That's the only thing I could say on that.
Mm-hmm. With that, I'm going to play a couple of clips from that PBS documentary. But before that, I forgot to even play my disclaimer, family. So I'm going to play the disclaimer for Sal. My fault, Sal. And then I'm going to shoot out the copyright disclaimer. And then we're going to get into this PBS documentary real quick. My fault, Sal. Bad, TJ.
Brand disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by individuals on this platform, the callers plus invited guests, are their own. The information you hear does not reflect the overall views of all parties associated with this brand. We encourage everyone to research all things heard live or via archive for edification purposes. Discretion is advised.
Don't touch that dial. You're now listening to Debate Talk Free Radio.
Help keep the show on the air. If you want to help, you can send your donation through PayPal. The email is debatetalkforyou@gmail.com or through Cash App, $Sal Showtime. Thanks for your support.
The roots of the Black Church run deep in the African continent. The human beings ensnared in the nightmare of the transatlantic slave trade practiced a wide variety of religions, including traditional ancestral worship, Islam, and in the Kingdom of Congo, a form of Catholicism that predated Columbus. Braving the horrors of the Middle Passage, enslaved Africans brought these ways of believing with them, along with their beliefs in the supernatural and their own protective deities. Over time, throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, Yoruba and Congo-based religions mixed with Roman Catholicism to create new religions: Vodou in Haiti, Santeria in Cuba, and Candomblé in Brazil. Here in the United States, religious practices such as hoodoo, obeah, and conjuration reflected their African religious roots. Incredibly, 210,000 Africans were brought here to the Carolinas and Georgia, nearly 50% of them arriving through the port of Charleston. Today, off the coast of Georgia, we can find some of the deepest traces of Christianity in places like Sapelo Island, home to the Gullah Geechee people. But the Muslim religion's strong roots persisted as well. Islam survived in ways that creolized Black Christianity.
During the 20s and 30s, people descended on Sapelo researchers and writers who were also looking for the African origins of Black culture. The missing link,
yeah.
Right? So the stories that they told contributed to a wealth of knowledge about the existence of Black Muslims on Georgia's coast.
What happened to the descendants of the Muslims who were here? Are you descended from a Muslim?
I am, actually. But most people from Sapelo are also descendants.
So the practice of Islam did not last very long within the community. Soon people were converted to Christianity.
There was a time where there were people who seemed to remember that there might be specific traditions that might be associated with Islam, burial practices, where graves are facing.
There's a lot of east to west orientation that I've seen.
One of the things that I think that is the story of Black religion in America is that what enslaved people did in this new context was they attempted to merge and, fuse these different worlds that they lived in.
Melissa is a descendant of Bilali Muhammad, who was brought to the island in the early 1800s, one of the many devout Muslims captured and enslaved in Senegambia. A quarter of the ancestors of African Americans came from this region. Bilali testified to his beliefs in a book of letters, written in his own hand.
He left a written record of both his attempts to reclaim and recall what he was remembering of his religious instruction.
In other words, he was determined to preserve his identity, this aspect of his identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, this was Bilali's daughter, and her sons would become very instrumental in the creation of First African Baptist Church on the island.
In 1930, Katie Brown, former slave and the great-granddaughter of Bilali Muhammad, recalled her own religious awakening as a young child.
Then I heard the old people singing. It made me feel like I ought to be a Christian. And I prayed and I prayed till I got my religion.
Oh, Jesus on the mainline, tell him what you want. Oh.
As the free black community slowly began to grow in the years before the Declaration of Independence, the first institutions that they created, along with their enslaved sisters and brothers, were houses of worship. One of the earliest was in Savannah, Georgia. Today, it's known as the First African Baptist Church. Reverend, I feel like I'm in the presence of black church religious history. Tell me the story of this church. Like a miracle.
Well, the church actually had its beginnings in 1773 when George Lowe, who was a slave, was granted permission to preach up and down the Savannah River. In August of 1777, he was able to obtain his freedom. He was able to also constitute the church. That same year.
You know what I love about this church? I always, whenever I go into a black church, I look to see what color God is, what color the angels, what color is Jesus. Your saints are your predecessors who founded and perpetuated the tradition. I think that's brilliant.
Well, this sanctuary actually would not have been built if it had not been for Andrew Cox Marshall, who preached for 44 years about how he wanted to build a brick church, not just the temporary wooden buildings that had been built. When we think of those who built the church, definitely of recent African descent, this building has so many symbols in it that are codes for various things in the windows, in the ceiling, on the side of the pews.
After long days of labor, the free and enslaved members of First African Baptist worked through the night to create a home in which to worship their God. The people who built these pews paid homage to Christ, but also left a surprising trace of another African religious past, Islam.
This is Arabic type of writing.
It's amazing that it survived.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure that if Christians knew that it was a Muslim, they would have just painted it over.
No, maybe. But those who also wrote this, they may be Christian themselves. But for them, religion is a continuity. Different ways of maybe worship, but it's the same God, the same principle. And it was written to be a legacy for the future generations.
First African Baptist in Savannah, Georgia, was born on the heels of an eruption of evangelical Christianity in the 1700s, the First Great Awakening. African Americans would reinterpret the scriptures, finding new meanings that resonated and spoke to their urgent needs for survival.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I know you were particularly interested in the Bilali Muhammad segment.
Well, yes, I'm glad they brought him up because he's one of the two figures that are at the very least relevant to the question of the plausibility of slaves in that region knowing Arabic. I mean, as we've alluded to earlier, we have lots of bits of evidence of slaves in the Americas knowing Arabic, but some of them are quite far from this region. For example, in Haiti, there's, the University of Pennsylvania has a text that a slave wrote. He wrote out Surat al-Ikhlas by hand. Also, the was it 1835 slave revolt in Bahia in Brazil was apparently organized by literate slaves who were writing in Arabic. But when it comes to Bilal Muhammad and also Umar ibn Sayyid, that's a situation where we have specifically slaves living in the southern United States who are literate in Arabic in specifically the middle of the 19th century, so roughly the 1850s. And I think that's significant. In the case of Bilal Muhammad, he was specifically in Georgia. He was on Sapelo Island. So for me, that's relevant. I'm sorry, go ahead. Is there something you want to?
No, I just agree in the fact that it's very plausible that you have people in the area who are literate in Arabic. Again, so it's almost all the cases or the majority of the cases that we find about slaves in the South that are literate in Arabic, they're almost always Fulani. Bilal Muhammad being no exception. And so we can see that they're extremely literate in Arabic at the time. And so if they're in the area, it stands to reason that the literacy survived for at least for a little while. As it states, the majority of people converted to Christianity. And even as the Harvard scholar said that the people who potentially wrote the Arabic might not have even been Muslim. They could have potentially been Christian, just practicing some kind of spiritual continuity.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that, I think, also touches on the question of the plausibility, because some people found it absurd to think that, for example, there might be a verse from the Quran on one of these pews. And what the way I see it is, I think we sort of have, because of the acrimonious debates between Christianity and Islam, there's sort of this natural tendency to just assume the Quran as a whole, contradicts the Christian faith, when in reality, there's a few verses within an Orthodox Islamic interpretation, obviously run counter to the Orthodox Christian faith, but the vast majority of the Quran is not really that controversial. And certainly, Surat An-Nas, or at least the third verse of Surat An-Nas, is not in any way, controversial. And so the analogy I would give is, for example, the people have talked about the Congo cosmogram, right? That exists. Now, I would say that's fairly obviously not something typical of the Baptist Protestant faith, right? That, Congo cosmograms are not necessarily, I would take that to be something that's a vestige of certain slaves' beliefs and symbology that existed before they embraced the Baptist faith. But it would be an example of something from their past that doesn't necessarily contradict the Christian faith. And so, likewise, another vestige of that could be Surat An-Nas. And what's interesting is that, when people teach children to memorize parts of the Quran, they start with the shorter surah at the end of the Quran. And as was pointed out by Samar Ali, and I think alluded to by Mahan Mirza, Surat An-Nas is essentially a prayer. It opens up with the word qul, and it's sort of ordering, imploring people to employ this prayer. And it's a prayer that, I could easily see a situation where someone who was raised by a Muslim or a former Muslim was taught this prayer as a child and retained it. And as they adopted the Christian faith, they didn't necessarily let go of that in its entirety, precisely because it doesn't contradict the faith they adopted. And so I'm glad that the scholar from Harvard, Boubacar Diakite, brought that up, that it isn't necessarily implausible for, although he wasn't, at least in the clips that we saw, he wasn't explicitly discussing Quranic material. It's nonetheless, I would say this portion of the Quran does not contradict their faith, just as the Congo cosmogram does not contradict their faith. You can retain vestiges that are harmonious with your new faith, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, and just to give some credence to what's being said, I just want to give some background information to Arabic being amongst some of the slaves in the area. Again, so these are pictures of slaves that were known to be literate in Arabic, of which you see here Omar ibn Said, who he's very, let me just go straight to his.
He's probably one of the best examples.
Yeah, exactly. One of the best examples for the simple case that he was thought to have converted to Christianity. I'll just read this here. Omar ibn Said was another Fulani Muslim from Senegal and enslaved from 1807 to 1864. He wrote an autobiography in Arabic. He was thought to have converted to Christianity, but when asked to write the Lord's Prayer in Arabic in 1857, was later found to have written Surah al-Nasr, the 110th Surah of the Quran. So
it speaks directly to the point of,
yes.
if people would say this man was a Christian, this slave was a Christian, therefore he would not be trafficking in Quranic material. We have a real world example of a person who was a slave, who was literate in Arabic, who was understood to be a Christian, publicly, and yet when he would put forth markings in Arabic, he was sometimes putting forth Quranic material, and apparently leading people to believe that it was biblical material.
Mm-hmm. And to the Harvard scholars' point, it wouldn't be unheard of for a once Muslim slave who was literate in Arabic to continue writing Arabic, even if he was considered to be a Christian. They wouldn't throw away the language that they were literate in just because they changed religions. Because again, like I stated in my video on the Pews, Arabic was the lingua franca of North and West Africa at the time. Mm-hmm. You can go to Timbuktu and find multiple different languages written in Arabic script. And real quick, is that something you want to speak to, the difference between a script and a language, or no?
It's an important distinction because so you can have Arabic script on the pews without Arabic language being there. As you pointed out, there were certain West African languages that were written in the Arabic script, and that happens to this day. There are certain African languages written in the Arabic script. So yeah, so the presence of Arabic script doesn't necessarily entail Arabic language, and that's also a point that I've tried to insist on, is that we need to keep in mind the distinction between script and language. And this also relates to the case for Arabic vis-a-vis other languages. The other languages that are being proposed, what's being proposed are individual characters, and therefore that falls into the realm of script. And with regards to, if we're going to make a case for saying it's sufficient just to show individual characters, some markings resembling individual characters, we certainly have that for Arabic. But, Arabic also has the added bonus of an apparent phrase, one that's endorsed by at least one scholar and more tentatively by a couple more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking to Brother Reggie from the conscious community, and he's of the concept that the pew that's mostly being seen is there's some form of West African Arabic on there, but he's also a proponent of there being codes and symbols and ciphers and all those kind of things on there as well.
It's certainly possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know though what those would be, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I haven't encountered anyone who's made a positive case for that.
Yeah, agreed. But it turned his view on it, I thought, was interesting because it turns it into a cultural conversation.
Mm.
Because I understand, like when for you this is merely a linguistic argument.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And I think this is where a lot of people are getting missing the concept, because for them it's a linguistic plus a cultural argument, or for a lot of them the culture is based on the language, etc. For me, I take the position of there potentially could be a multiple or multitudes of African languages or scripts, etc. on the pews, given the different groupings of people that were in the area and coming through, etc. Not to mention the like you already mentioned, the Bakongo symbol, what Ephraim Isaac says about the potentiality of Ge'ez on the pews, etc.
Apparently the quilts, certain quilts.
The 9 patch. The 9 patch is serious. Because at that juncture, when you get into the 9 patch, you're talking about, this is where it gets into the cultural concept. Now we're talking about the potentiality of being included in the Underground Railroad. So when the church themselves are saying that there's codes, etc., all around the church, on the ceiling, on the floors, on the pews, and whatnot, now we're talking about a cultural argument in terms of, okay, now this is, to me, this specifically applies to the code and trade language arguments or whatnot, in the sense to where those particular arguments are I can see them being linked to the Underground Railroad, because the Underground Railroad was known to use codes and symbols and things of that nature, including the 9 patch. So for me, when I see people like Ephraim Isaac talking about potential single letter recognition versus phraseology and whatnot, I don't rule out the the single letters potentially playing a role in some form of a code.
Nor would I. Yeah, no, of course.
But I definitely agree in the sense to where if you're gonna talk about a language being found on the pew, that you should look for phraseology, because that's again we're talking about a difference between a code, a script, and a language. Right? With the code, I could take that 9 patch, and I could take symbols and pictures and all kind of stuff and stick them in the 9 patch and come up with a grid of some sort, right? With script, I can find individual letters, and that could be like an alphabet, right? And I go, like, you know what, this identifies a script, but that's not an actual phrase, right? But I can identify this is this script and this alphabet from this script, right? However, if I got a full phrase, like you're talking about a surah from the Quran, it's easier to recognize. You can see, okay, this scholar over here saying this scholar over there saying that. They can all recognize this phrase from this recognizable passage from the Quran, etc. It's easier to get a solid hit on that kind of an argument. However, I would say this though. Well, let me ask this question. Do you take into account the cultural aspect of the involvement of the Underground Railroad?
No, I've generally not got into that at all. So no, and so no. I mean, I haven't put much consideration to it at all.
So,
and I don't mean that in a negative sense, like I have an aversion to it. I'm just saying my examination of this has been very limited, and so therefore it didn't touch that. That's the way I put that.
Okay. Do you think in any way, shape, or form the involvement of the Underground Railroad changes the linguistic argument at all?
Well, yeah, you've raised the point that, and even without the Underground Railroad, but certainly with it, if you have multiple people who may or may not know multiple languages, if they're making markings on the pews after they've been set up. I remember back in November, the Boom Church panel presented the argument that the pews were marked before they were put in place. But if they're making markings, if visitors to the church are making these markings, people who are being set free and sort of transitioning from one spot to the next, it certainly makes sense that the markings would differ from each other. That would provide a plausible, because that's one of the concerns that I've had, is that the markings on these pews are so strikingly different from one another, and so that at least provides a plausible explanation for why they would be so different.
Mm-hmm.
But and also with regards to like individual characters possibly, serving as some sort of code. I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, this is it's perhaps a bad analogy, but the first thing that comes to mind is recently in Iraq with the rise of Daesh, with what's called ISIS, on the homes of Shia, they were putting a single character. They were putting the character Ra, the Arabic equivalent of the R, to symbol Rawafid, or Rafidi or something like that, to symbolize Shia. Now, if we didn't know the context of that and we just saw a Ra on a wall, it would be almost meaningless. It just looks like a comma or something like that, But for those who knew what their intention was, they understood they're marking the homes of people they feel they have particular positions on. It's sort of a designation. So now I know that's an awkward analogy, but the point is that, yes, if people have a certain agreement on how to interpret an individual character, then yes, an individual character can certainly serve as a code or as a reference.
Right. Hold on real quick. Let me check something out.
By the way, I was going to say, I mean, we don't have to do this right now, but also we can take, I'd be happy to take questions from the audience. I unfortunately was unable to focus on the chat, but I sort of saw that Anonymous Hebrew had some, he was offering some thoughts, and, I didn't get a good sense of it just because I wasn't paying close enough attention, but it looked like he, had some interesting points to raise. So, and maybe others do as well. I haven't taken a close look at the chat, but that's also a possibility if you're interested.
Anonymous, feel free to jump on, brother man. I just dropped the link. Just dropped the link. So are you familiar with trade languages and how they came about in West Africa, etc.?
No, it's not. I first heard about that from your video, actually, your first video on the subject. So what exactly is it? Is it sort of like a language that's used in between languages, a sort of a bridge?
Like so. Are you familiar with like Mozambique?
Say it again.
Like Mozambique from Spain. Like
yes.
They're very similar concept to that, to where you have multiple people coming together that speak different languages, and so they merge them together to make kind of like one language, so they can all kind of trade around and do certain things with it.
I got you. So used mainly for commerce, for interactions. Okay. It's certainly a possibility vis-a-vis the Pews, but I don't have a meaningful comment at this time.
Yeah, Anonymous, I don't see you as of yet, but feel free to jump on. I'll put the link in the chat one more time.
And of course, questions from anyone else, and etc.
Yeah. So, where would you like to see the argument or discussion on the Pews go from here?
Really, what I want is I want to see more pictures of the Pews, obviously, and I'm hoping we can get is the position that I had from the very beginning, which is that we focus on the markings themselves, more focus on them. There's been very little of that over. Recently there's been a little bit, but for the most part, there's been almost no focus on the markings. I'm happy to consider the positions of scholars, but I certainly don't want to get into this mode of, simply deferring to them. And I've seen that on both sides, where there's certain people on both sides, people who, favor a position and people who are hostile to that position. There's certain people who will say, this scholar said something I like, you're not an expert, you need to be quiet, like as if, the high priest has spoken and, accept the dogma. So I'm happy to consider the positions of other scholars, but I certainly think we need to focus more on methodological questions and on the markings themselves and, the different ways to interpret them. That's what I'm most interested in, the markings themselves.
Yeah, that's what's up. So I'm bringing on Anonymous right now, but as I'm bringing him on, I got one final question. So in light of Benaiah Israel's research in terms of the people of the church referring to themselves as mothers and fathers in Israel, etc., do you feel that them self-identifying as Israel in any way, shape, or form, literal, figurative, etc., has any play on how to read the Pews or look into the Pews or the culture of the Pews or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm reluctant to see it as terribly relevant because, it may be related, but I'm reluctant to see the relation, how relevant it is. I think because I think a lot of people, as you alluded to, there are various ways to refer to oneself as Israel, and many people have done that, and of course, many people can do that without being familiar with, a script, a particular script, or much less a particular language. I certainly don't think it would contribute much to the more acrimonious disputes between, because certain people try to set up a dichotomy, which I know you don't agree with this, and I myself don't agree with this, where either it's Hebrew or it's Arabic. Like, if it's Hebrew, then we reject Arabic out of hand, or vice versa. What I would say is that, again, and maybe this is another poor analogy, but like, for example, in Afghanistan, you have the Pashtuns, many of them describe themselves as literally being descendants of the children of Israel. And they're writing in essentially a Persian dialect in the Arabic script. They're writing in Dadi and stuff like that. So identifying as Israel doesn't necessarily tell us about the markings that someone is producing. There's plenty of people who identify as Israel who are writing in the Latin script, the Arabic script, and of course some writing in the Hebrew script. But it's a fascinating subject. When I first got interested in this, it wasn't out of some desire. I know people think it's out of some desire to refute Israelites. For me, it was just because the idea in itself is fascinating. It's something that's interesting to me because I remember, I don't have a source handy, unfortunately, but I remember, like 20 years ago, I read about in Suriname, there was a Jewish slaveholder from the Netherlands, and his slaves converted to rabbinic Judaism. And, they adopted his faith, and he set them free and gave them the land that he had them working on. It became their land. And I remember reading in a book that they were using, some semblance of Hebrew in accordance with their. So, and for me, that was fascinating. And so it is the idea of slaves using Hebrew in some capacity is fascinating. And I certainly wouldn't rule it out. That was my initial interest when the claim first came up. But however, when I began to examine the available images, I became more skeptical.
Let me welcome my brother, good brother, Anonymous Hebrew, to the panel. Shalom, brother. How you doing?
Hey, yo, shalom, to both you brothers. This is a great conversation, man.
Greetings.
Greetings, bro. It's finally good to have a conversation with you.
Likewise. There's a gentleman named, I forgive me if I mispronounce his name. I hope he'll forgive me. I think it's Yehuchanan. And Yehuchanan had recommended you on Facebook in a couple of private messages. I think he was going to attempt to put me in contact with you, if I recall correctly. So I'm glad that, finally we get to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's our mutual acquaintance, exactly. And I don't really have much disagreements. I think I like your approach to it. I like you came at it scholastically. I think you heard at least the first, maybe even the second one that more the first the videos that more put together, and I want to state, at least especially for the gentleman in the chat, and this is more for him. My stance is not that you find just this plethora of Hebrew writing on the panels. I don't see that. I do see, some forms of what we can maybe say Arabic, but we see a mixture of languages, which is why I suggest that people go take the tour. Depending on your tour guide, you'll find out he's saying that they spoke a mixture of languages, right? He's saying that these people would have been dealing with Arabic, a form of patois, as well as like a Maghrebi or some type of Hebrew dialect. And this lines up with, some of Godbeat's work dealing with people from Nigeria. Is this what this, is what we see? And we know that they definitely had some influence with Arabic. So, it would have never been, I would have never tried to challenge that. I don't, I'm not mad at any of my brothers who do, but I would say the likelihood that this is Arabic or some form of Arabic, especially the more pews that we look at, it's highly likely. Unlike, the couple of pews that I see passed around, I have a good deal of pictures, just from the one side. Like you said, you only got one side that you pretty much have access to. Hopefully soon we'll get a chance to go in there and kind of look at all of them. But I do personally believe that this is some form of a trade dialect, some form of thing that they're dealing with at that time, especially due to being enslaved and dealing with the Underground Railroad, which that church also has ties to when you get down into the basement. So now, is that 100%? Oh, I got scholars that say that. Nah, that's what we're working on. We're working on putting that work together. But we do have scholars that will attest to a lot of the tribes that identify, that would have some type of identification as like the B'nai Ephraim and in southern Nigeria, I want to say, that they would have been speaking a mixture of some form of Maghrebi, Hebrew, Arabic, and patois. And so I think it's important for us to take a look at that and see what we have. I wanted to understand your false positive statement. Right. That was really my biggest thing, because I had an issue, and maybe I heard wrong. I was kind of being accosted in the chat. So I wanted to deal with that. But I wanted to understand what you were saying about the false positive. Are you saying you're getting false positives if you turn the pictures? Or are you saying you're getting false positives because we have various letterings that we can't really tie to one specific language?
Oh, well, just to be clear, I want to be clear that I was saying that it was more the potential for false positives.
Got you.
What I was saying is that now, obviously, I can never speak on the intention of a person who made a particular marking. And so what I'm saying is that when you have a marking that resembles a character from a script, if it's not part of a phrase, what happens is it's much more often, not always, but it's often subject to more interpretations. And that's what I was saying. So with regards to the pew, there's a certain level of uncertainty as to which way we should look at the marking. So, even suggesting, is characters, or as Benaiah did, two chetz, that involves sort of rotating the pew 90 degrees one way or the other. And so it does beg the question of which way we look at the markings, and as a result, it can be interpreted in a number of ways, and that's where the potential for false positives can come in. So that's why I gave the example. Like I could write, let's say, a Phoenician character, a quote unquote Paleo Hebrew character, and without me saying how I intended it, someone could interpret it differently. Like for example, if I only write the Phoenician shin, the Paleo Hebrew shin, it looks a lot like a Latin W. And so someone might assume it's a W, and then the reverse is true. I could write a W, and someone might say, well, he intended it as a shin. Without the context of a phrase, that's where the potential for false positives and multiple interpretations.
Got you. Now, and I want to make this clear to the person in the chat. He wasn't stating what you're saying, right? I appreciate that. That's a form of scholarship, saying we have the potential for these things, especially if you're saying if we turn them this way, if we see these things. I agree. Myself personally, when I went there and I looked at the pictures, and all the pictures even that I sent to Moore, I didn't attempt to turn them. I didn't attempt to do any of that. I looked at it for what it was. And once again, that's why I suggest people go to do the tour, because you get in context how they would have written it, right? They're actually putting the pews together, and they're putting some form of writing on there. Now, could they have laid it to the side and wrote on it? Sure, possibly. But the way that they're explaining it, it's this long, tedious process of love of how they actually built this church. And so, initially I thought like, well, maybe they're putting their initials on there, or maybe they're signing it. But once we do the studies and start to get more comfortable in understanding that they did have some form of a trade dialect, I'm becoming more and more, I at least want to look into that. But I appreciate that standpoint, because the way I understood that you were saying is that you're simply talking about, turn it this way. That's where the false positives are coming from. You're saying that there's a potential for a false positive because of the way that it can be viewed or interpreted. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, the way I would put it is that, so for example, for a particular pew, we touched on at least 3 different interpretations of the same markings. Now, I, of course, cannot say definitively that any of those interpretations in terms of characters are necessarily false, because I don't know the intentions of the men who made those markings. But because there's multiple interpretations, we would presume that some of them have to be mistaken, and that's where the potential comes in, and then the sort of question marks that remain.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important what Moore is saying is trying to really, let's get a look at all of them. And then let's really take a look at this concept of some form of a trade dialect, right? When we see a potential for multiple languages on these pews, right? That in itself either suggests that they're speaking multiple languages, or that there's some method to what they're doing, right? Or even I think we've heard something like maybe it's some form of a prayer, or some type of protection situation. I wouldn't rule that out, but I think all 3 of us agree that we see multiple forms of, multiple languages, or I shouldn't even say languages, because I know then we're saying, well, what script does it say, or what phrase does it say? So let me be, try to be as scholastic as possible. We see forms of different languages on there, different expressions of ways of communicating, however you want to put it. But I think the route that Moore and myself and a few other brothers are trying to go is gonna be the best way to figure out what's going on those pews.
Well, at the very least, I'll say this: you gentlemen, the 2 videos you made on the pews certainly took it in a different direction. That was one of the things I really appreciated about those 2 videos, is the amount of nuance that it brought. Because unfortunately, I think before you gentlemen, now I know you said you were involved in this before the recent controversies, but when you gentlemen entered into the recent discussion, prior to that public entrance, it seemed that most people seemed to be moving forward with either it's this language or it's that. There was sort of, and so you've sort of opened the door to a more nuanced way of looking at it, and I think that certainly changed the nature of the discussion, because certain people were just hostile. They're just waving an idea out of hand. It's this language, so therefore it can't be that language. And, I don't know. And obviously, you brought some complexity to the table.
I appreciate
more
that.
complexity, greater complexity.
Yeah, I appreciate, and I appreciate. You know what I'm noticing? Certain people that we are able to have scholastic conversations. There's no pride. It's just we're trying to find out what's going on, right?
And nobody raised their voice. There's been no name
Know what I'm
calling. We're just dealing with the arguments, weighing them out.
And so I appreciate that. I appreciate that standpoint. I don't know much about I tried to stay out of the Richard Katz thing. I'll say, and I'll say this to anybody: if either way it go, if there's something wrong that my brothers did, you know, I love them, and let's figure out how to clear that up. If they didn't do anything wrong, eventually, if we can get to the bottom of it, then they deserve an apology. But I don't want the Katz situation to muddy up a situation or muddy up the need for us to have this conversation, because at best, this is a national treasure for Black people. Honestly, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of us were told these slaves couldn't write, they couldn't read, they couldn't do this thing, and now we're finding out that they had some form of communicating. So that in itself, for those of us that are real members of the diaspora, that's something to revel in. And so we really need to take our chances and to study that and learn and see what was going on.
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly say this about the Katz situation. It is largely a distraction. I've said this before. You know, I know myself and Faithful to God were at the forefront of, you know, bringing a certain view forward on that. But I honestly didn't want to get into that because I would much prefer that we focus on the markings. You know, that's these sort of, you know, where we're being forced to address what a scholar allegedly said. It sort of takes us away from, you know, just looking at the markings, especially if it's, you know, a claim of a scholar in the absence of any recourse to the markings. So, yeah, I would much prefer to look at the markings as well. Just let that be the focus.
I agree. And I wanted to commend you, too. I heard you on Faithful's channel. I forgot what y'all might have been dealing with the Pews. And I heard a certain portion of it. And I saw him trying to take it somewhere, you know, being real and insulting and things. And you were trying to bring it back. Like, yo, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do it. Like, I don't, you know. And so I appreciate that because you're keeping the same energy away from this platform that you even bring it on here now. So I appreciate that. And I want to, you know, when people do good, I want to also commend them for that. So, and now that I got a clear understanding about the false positive situation, especially when you're clarifying that with the statement of potentially, that's scholastic. That's how we should look at things. So.
Yeah.
We still there, my fault.
We good.
Oh, okay. So, Abu, let me ask you this then. Are you familiar with the potential or the possibility that West Africans would have been speaking a mixture of, you know, these languages?
Well, I would I'll put it this way. Something that, you know, separate from this conversation, something I often say to people is that with the rise of Zionism and the controversies that Zionism has created, a lot of people reflexively have this idea of Jews not being in Muslim lands. But when the reality is that before the rise of Zionism, basically for all of Islamic history, almost everywhere a Muslim was, with the exception of Mecca and Medina, almost everywhere where Muslims were, there were Jews within that territory as well. And so on just about every Muslim territory, there were Jews there overlapping with that. So even separate from sub-Saharan Africa, but I would take it for granted that existed within sub-Saharan Africa as well, that the Jewish communities there were overlapping, you know, their liturgical languages with their, you know, with the what would be the dominant language, or at least the dominant script. And we see that at least now. I don't know much about the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, but we certainly see that elsewhere. We see that in Spain. We see that in Sicily. I mean, I've literally had the pleasure of working with documents that are Arabic documents written in specifically the Solitreo script that were written by Jews, and they're writing to, non-Jewish authorities within Sicily, and stuff like that. So that sort of existed. Yeah. So I would take it for granted that in any, at least territory that had a sizable population of Muslims, there were probably Jews there, and there probably was some sort of melding of languages and scripts and stuff like that, Certainly there's lots of cases of, for example, people, Judeo-Arabic was very widespread amongst Jewish communities in the Muslim world, But unfortunately, I don't know much about what the situation would be within, places where, slaves were taken from, but I take it for granted that if there were Muslims there, then that same phenomenon was probably happening. Got you.
And, that's really where we're operating from. And that's the work that we're putting together. I did want to ask you one more question. It kind of deals with the same, not the pews, but just kind of the same concept, if possible. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of trying to understand this, right? It's so hard to talk to brothers and sisters from the UA community without it turning contentious. So it is. So, but I would like to know if there is a pushback on some of us that identify, even if we're saying genetically, as having connections to the Jewish population or Israelite population, however we want to word it, if there is a pushback on that from you, and if so, why? And I'm asking this really.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I think I cut you off.
I'm asking because, not to be contentious, I want to know what we need to do in order to be able to come to get our brothers and sisters more to the scholastic conversation of this.
Well, what I would say is that my position, and I'm not necessarily in a way that people are aware of, but I've stated this many times in the past, even with other members of the, what's called the urban apologetics spectrum. I'm not even sure how to define it, but nonetheless, amongst others, I've taken this position that honestly, I would never tell an individual, like I certainly understand skepticism about groups numbering in the millions, but if an individual wants to claim that he descends from somebody, while I'm fine with people being skeptical, I personally would never tell a person that they don't descend from that person, because how could I? I mean, obviously I don't know anyone's lineage. And I think this is a phenomenon. The way I see it is, for example, I'm a Christian, and specifically a Catholic. Within the Catholic Church, there are converts from there. There are occasionally Ashkenazi Jews who convert, and they'll continue to insist that they descend from, Jacob, from the patriarchs of the Bible. Now, what I would always say is that the way we move forward within that paradigm is that the claim in itself is not necessarily problematic. I understand if people want to be skeptical, but there's no reason to necessarily fight with a person. Like if a Catholic who's of Ashkenazi ancestry says he descends from Jacob, I don't see any reason to try and put a finger in his chest and say, no, you don't. And especially if we don't know his lineage. And then that follows that the same, if we're going to be fair, that has to apply to, let's say, a member of the African diaspora who makes the same claim that they descend from Jacob. Likewise, I don't see any reason to put a finger in someone's chest and say, I know your lineage across millennia, when, frankly, I don't. So I don't fight with individuals on their lineage claims. I really am not interested in it, With regards to groups, I'm not terribly interested in the arguments about, saying this group of millions of people are Israelites, but occasionally I'm willing to discuss it with people. I am somewhat skeptical, or I think the question might be more complex than some put it out there, but I certainly don't ever deny an individual's lineage claims.
Hey man,
if that makes any sense. And I think that's fair. If I'm not going to fight with an Ashkenazi Jew, I shouldn't fight with an African American or whatever, a member of the African diaspora outside of the United States who's making the same claim, or anyone else, a Pashtun, whoever,
And just so, since we're having this conversation, this is why we kind of have the same conversation with a lot of our brothers. Like, I'm not arguing about whether or not an Ashkenazi is or is not, right? Like,
nor was I, by the way. That wasn't intended to say that they are. Right. I actually have my own levels of skepticism vis-a-vis them, but
right. But at this point, like, I'm more worried about, okay, if we're making that claim, let's get to the point where either we prove it, or let's just say, you know what, culturally, this is just what I identify with. Mm-hmm. Right? There's nothing wrong with saying that as well, right? Just saying, look, this is who I am now. This is the culture that I study and I If you want to say I spiritually identify with that, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, what happens is when some of us go deeper and look into our roots, and I want to say this sensitively, while I can look and see that I guess my most recent migration is from West Africa, that's because of the people sampling when we look at genetics. But my DNA is from the Levant, and it's Southeast Africa, and its connection to these Ethiopian Jews, and that's just my DNA. That's Moor's DNA. That's Jehukannan's DNA. Like, I can't sit here and speak for hundreds of millions of people or whatever. I can't say it's a good chance that a lot of us may have it. But we never go out and say every person that was a part of the diaspora was, descendant of this. So, full disclosure, if you're taking that route, I want to also take this route and take the time to say, if we can have these type of conversations, like I appreciate you this evening, Abu, right? We can have these type of conversations. This is how we start to grow scholastically. And I appreciate it. That's all I know to tell you. Like, I'm grateful for you coming on and keeping you cool, no yelling, no insults, even with your pushback about what you feel with our brothers, Pastor Richardson and Moray Brown, who I will say those are my brothers, right? You weren't inflammatory. Now, I don't know everything that's happened in the past. I don't know the interactions. But I can say this evening, you have not tried to be inflammatory. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your views on the pews. And I hope that we can have more dialogue, especially as more information comes out about it. So.
Agreed. I certainly, yeah. And I think, cordial dialogue is always important. There's no need to be ever upset in these conversations, because the way I see it, I think this is what I'll say with regards to the acrimony that exists in discussion. And this is something I've said privately with, other Christians, that on both sides of a lot of these Christian Israelite debates. Now, I know those aren't clean distinctions. There's people who are both Israelites and Christians. But if we can just use the broad distinctions, Christians and Israelites, on both sides of these debates, I don't know how to describe it, but I feel like a lot of people take their positions extremely personally, and therefore a lot of emotion gets involved, and things can get acrimonious very fast, unfortunately. And I think both sides will have people who are trying to punish people for something someone else did. You know what I mean? Like someone else from your community disrespected me, so now I'm going.
Right.
Yeah, on both sides, that's the silent mindset. I'm going to make you pay for what somebody else said to me. You're just like that guy, and or I'm going to assume you're like that because you're running with him. You have mildly similar positions to him, so But no, yeah, I think it's much better to just have cordial discussions. And the thing is, my position has always been that there's no loss in, let's say I take a position, and let's say I have a discussion with Orthodox Moor, and he presents a case, and my position is definitively refuted by his position. Like, if anything, I benefit from that. Like, we actually benefit from our arguments being refuted. Like, it's not that I think a lot of people, they put a lot of emphasis on winning an argument, when I think we should just be trying to explore how we understand the evidence, how we interpret the evidence, and which way the evidence points on a given subject, whatever it is. Some people are into lineage claims, I'm more into linguistic claims, like the Pews, like Lashman Kodash, etc. But whatever the case, I think that's why I'm able to have well, let me rephrase that. I think all of us would be able to have.
I don't deal with the Lashawans. I just want to point that out.
Oh no, I know. Of course. Yeah. No, I was just using that as an example of my interests. But what I'm saying is that the gist of it is, I think we collectively, people can have cordial discussions if they're less interested in like winning at all costs, at defending their positions, and are sort of open to, like, for example, on the Pews specifically, my position has always been that while I'm skeptical about there being language on the Pews, I want to see other people's cases for language on the Pews. I would welcome correction on that, and on any other subject. We benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
We all benefit from new information, including information that refutes a position that we held previously.
That's fair. And then I'll say this to my brothers and sisters in the chat, if you are listening, as it pertains to the pews, it's a work in progress, right? That needs to be understood. Like, we haven't even been able to examine all of the pews, right? There's a whole other 40 panels, basically, because it's 20 on the other side, if I'm not mistaken. And we still need to get at and examine and see, and if we can find some consistency and find some things. But I will say, you know, based upon what I've seen, we see multiple expressions on there, right? It's not just one clear cut. This is Ge'ez, or this is Arabic, or this is Hebrew. And by the way, there's very few markings that I would consider to be 100% Hebrew, right? So we can't just want to be sensitive and real when I say this. We cannot just definitively jump out and just say, oh, it's Hebrew. Because as Moore said, I went there, like me and my wife went there with the hopes and impression that we're gonna see, you know, this Hebrew. And you know, I was so amped when I got out. I'm out there on a trip with my wife, and I'm calling these guys like, yo, this is not just Hebrew. This is Arabic. This is, you know, I'm seeing all type of stuff on here. So it was, and like I said, that was in what, 2019. I mean, August
of 2019. Yeah,
August of 2019. So yeah, like.
And for the record, family, G-Con was on for that first couple phone calls.
Facts. So I like it. I like the conversation. I think we need to do it more. I would love to have the brother Benaiah on next time. I think that would really be an interesting conversation. He's got a lot of good information. Final question, and I don't know if Moore asked you this. How much does culture play into identifying this as well? And maybe he asked you this, I don't know, but
he asked a question similar to that. I mean, I guess at least as far as like interpreting codes, that it could have a huge factor in terms of one's ability to identify something. But by and large, at least when we're searching for discernible language, I personally have tried to separate out cultural questions and stuff like that, largely, you know. But if it's for something beyond that, I think cultural questions become relevant, at least for the stuff like codes and symbols and stuff like that, you know.
Now, and I'm not trying to, you know, press on this, but
it's fine. It's fine. Ask any question. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to keep it cool. But wouldn't you think, and this is just me now, scholar to scholar, like thinking about this, wouldn't you think though, because of the significance or just this specific situation as it pertains to these slaves, this church having connection to the Underground Railroad, and what we know of what's going on with this slave trade at this time, and just the different things that these group of people are going through, like, wouldn't that maybe play like a huge part in how we would identify and determine what was going on with those pews?
Moore did ask a question along those lines. For me personally, because my view was very narrow and just trying to look for discernible language, I didn't give a lot of thought to that. But yes, I mean, obviously, what you're describing, like the Underground Railroad, that can have a lot of relevance to how one approaches it. Like, for example, I've seen one case presented, or one, maybe, I don't know if speculation is the right word, but one speculation that was put forth was that the markings were made first on boards, on free boards, and then they were inserted into the pews when the pews were built. While Orthodox Moor, while bringing in the context of the Underground Railroad, has proposed a possibility, and I think this does change the paradigm, and it does change our potential perception of it, where the pews are already in place, and different people who are transitioning from location to location are making those markings while they're on a stop, and that does sort of change one's perspective of what's possible, what's likely. So yeah, my honest answer is I haven't given much thought to it, but that's the little bit I could say on it, at this time.
Yeah, got you. I appreciate the honesty.
I appreciate that. Yeah, for real.
I appreciate that. And I think that, that's that point that Moore made is something that we went back and forth with a lot. Knowing that, and then knowing the history of how this church even, like, I don't even got the time, but the history of how this church got built, it in itself, it lends to maybe something like that, and I'm trying to be real careful about how I say it, because still got to do all the scholastic
particularly
work.
when you understand that the first preacher was able to move freely up and down certain areas just because he was teaching Christianity and whatnot. He was able to move where other people weren't able to move and whatnot. So there's a lot there with that. But no, I appreciate what you said about not particularly considering the cultural context of whatnot.
Well, it does change, as I mentioned earlier. Like initially, one of my big concerns, and it was one of the things that really is one of multiple things that fed into my skepticism about it being coherent language, was, when the few pews that are available, when you look at the markings, they're starkly different. They're very different. For me, that sort of, if they were all done at the same time, that sort of feeds into my skepticism that there's a single language there, that it's a coherent language, because it starts to look much more like just random markings. But when you propose that maybe it's multiple people at different points in time, obviously that changes how I would react to the disparities or the stark differences in the markings.
And I'm gonna go a little deeper. When you examine multiple boards there, right? It looks like it's either written at different times or it's written with different utensils, if that makes sense. And so that, in my opinion, gives more credence or credibility to the concept of maybe these are written by different people at different stops, because some look like real tiny, tight, being able to maybe it's a stylistic tool that they're using. Some could just be a rough piece of stick that they use. It's all type of different stuff going on there. And I agree with that statement that you made of, like, we see starkly, drastically different things on different parts of those pews. And that theory is a very powerful theory and a very powerful concept that I think we need to look into.
And for me, like, my connection to the Pews has nothing to do with trying to identify as an Israelite or whatever. For me, I look at that as someone who descends from slaves. And so I see the potentiality of, I'll just say this, if any language is on the Pews, we owe it to our ancestors to find out what they left us, because they went through some effort to leave it. And being that there's Bakongo's symbols, potential West African Arabic. I mean, if it's West African Arabic, which form of West African Arabic? And on top of that, like, multiple people spoke Arabic. It could say multiple things. Like what I was saying with Brother Reggie earlier, talking about Brother Reggie, is he even admitted that even if it is Arabic, we'd have to go double check to see if it's not even Hebrew or some other language written in the Arabic. So even if it's Arabic, it can represent still other languages from West Africa, whatnot. And I'm trying to find out is how, if there are different languages there, how many and what do they say? Because they all represent a different story, a different path, a different link to the same slave trade that we all that the descendants from the slave trade link that come from.
And that's actually what Abu was saying when he was talking about the thing in Italy, like this like, that's what I was understanding when he was saying that. And go ahead, Abu. I know you had.
Well, no, what I was going to say is, like, we briefly touched on Judeo-Arabic, where you had Jews writing Arabic in various Hebrew scripts. But while that was far more common, what was less common but nonetheless existed was there were also Jews who were writing Hebrew in Arabic script. That was less common than Judeo-Arabic, but nonetheless, Hebrew written in the Arabic script did exist. And so that's a fair point. And then, of course, we know there are non-Semitic languages that are written in the Arabic script as well.
I wanted to touch on one little thing too that you spoke about, the Pashtun people. I was actually deployed in this area, right? And that was something that I experienced, and I'd have been telling these guys about this. Like, I had been telling some of my brothers about this. Like, you understand, like, a lot of these people, would identify as being, children of Israel.
While also faithful Orthodox Muslims.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because a lot of people think that's a contradiction, at least within the African American paradigm. Like in Philly, Philadelphia, New York, maybe other cities, you'll meet guys that are both Israelites and Muslims, and people say that's ridiculous. You got to pick one. How can you be a Muslim or an Israelite? And the reality is, outside of America, you have people who identify as Muslims, who are faithful Muslims, and yet they believe they descend from, the biblical patriarchs.
Right.
In that vein, shalom alaikum, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know what it is?
This guy. All praises. That's my bro right there. That concept to me though is extremely powerful. Also in the vein of understanding how vast we have to look at this. Like we really got to look at this, because you're talking about taking people from one side of the world, bringing them all the way over here. And so trying to piece all that together is much more complicated than I think some people are trying to make it. And so that's why I say I appreciate, the approach. And even on some of the things that I may disagree on, it's not like you're disrespectful or even just rattling your saber. You're just like, look, let's look at it like this. And you are saying that some of the assertions kind of are asinine, and we agree.
Or remain open to question.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know how some of the assertions about language, some of the languages that are supposed to be on there, I don't see it. Right, and I'll just leave it at that. You just got to be honest, especially if we say we're the people of the book, or however you want to put it. So I think it's an excellent example of what we can do if we sit down and calm down and try to have some good conversations.
Yeah, it's much more fruitful if the discussion is cordial. I agree.
Right.
By the way, for Orthodox Moor, I actually have a question for you.
Go ahead.
And there's nothing. It's just I'm just curious. In light of, I think I know the answer, but just to be clear, in light of the title of the show, is Arabic? Does Arabic have the strongest case? I know your position is that it's likely multiple languages on the pews. What is your position thus far? Not necessarily, in the abstract, but thus far, in light of the available looks, do you have a position on which language thus far has the strongest case?
I think that the language on that one particular pew is West African Arabic, and it does stipulate one verse from Surah 114.
Okay.
In terms of all the pews, I'm of the position that we need to examine all 80 panels of all 40 pews and go then deal with them on a case-by-case basis.
I agree.
Fair enough. Yep, I agree as well.
In terms of the Ge'ez that Ephraim Isaac talked about, I have no reason to go against that until I see reasons to until I understand his methodology as to how he was able to identify it, and understand how I could go against that and falsify it.
Yeah, I think I would save you time if you was going to ask me. I agree. So.
Yes, please. By all means.
Well, I'm just putting that out there because it leads me to this last point that I want to make to the listening audience. If you was planning on using these pews to prove something, don't do that. Number one, it's not necessary. Right? There's so many other ways that we can go about doing this. Scholastically, let's try not to hijack this, because this is something else, right? This is a national treasure, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Right, and let's let it be that. Let's let it be something that's amazing, that shows what these slaves were doing and what they were going through, and those of us that really descend from that, let's treat it as such. Now, if later we do get more connection to it and all of that, but remember, these people self-identified as Israelites already. Now, if that's by conversion or that's how they came over here, That's a whole nother conversation. But we see on, some of the gravestones and stuff, the headstones, like we know what they're identifying as. So certain things I don't think we need to be arguing, at least trying to prove our heritage and our identity. There's just other ways. And I think, me and the brother Moore and a couple other brothers, we really worked to do a lot of that work for you. I mean, there's some other brothers who've done amazing work, we can just start naming them. So there's more scholastic ways to go about doing it. Let's let this be a national treasure. And if you can get there, go look at it. Go. The heritage in Savannah alone is amazing. But that actual church, when you go there and you take the tour and you hear it, it's much deeper than just Israelite, right? This is diasporic history, if I can use diasporic as a word. This is history. So go look at it, and see what your ancestors built.
100%. I will say this too. So I'm aware of the argument that there's a big push for the church to try to change the culture of the church. So at one point they used to say that it was cursive Hebrew on the pews, and now they don't. And for some, there's like a big conspiratorial concept behind it, which may or may not exist. I have no idea. I don't have any evidence to the sort or not to the sort. What I will say is this: if I was an institution and I was dealing with the pews and I own the pews or whatnot, I would realistically, like, so if I'm going to bring people in and they're going to look at the pews and they're going to tell me what they see so far, you have to agree that Arabic is the strongest thing they can point to for at least that one pew, which is probably why you have PBS honing in on that one pew out of all of them. In that
I thought that was interesting as well. Yeah, the particular pew they zoomed in on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Well, no, I mean that of all the pews to zoom in on, when Gates says that there was traces of another religion, Islam, and he stops and focuses on a particular pew, of course, it really stood out for me that it was the precise pew that multiple people have looked at and said that they believe, again, with different levels of confidence, they believe they see something resembling a Quranic verse. Yeah, that stood out for me. I do think that's significant.
Right. And if I have knowledge of any information on those, the documentary that since the University of Cincinnati has about there potentially being Hebrew or etc., I'm going to go, this is just as a business, right, as a tourism kind of a thing. I'm going to try to point to what's definite or what's most likely definite. So they don't say that there's not cursive Hebrew on there, whatever. But they do talk about like Arabic writing, etc. And again, from my family, I just want to point this out. Even if that one pew is Arabic, it does not discount any. You can't extrapolate what's on that one pew and put it on another pew. You have to go take the pews on a case by case basis. But even like brother Dr. Reggie said, that even if it's Arabic, you gotta go through it and see if there's another language that's written in that script.
Right.
So we got to really, really slow down on this and not be emotional about the concept, because we might miss something. We might miss the fact, like, you might not want to check out a pew because they got Arabic on it, and find out that it could have been like what the scholar from Harvard said, that they might have been Muslim, but now they're Christian, keeping cultural continuity going in the way that they knew how to praise the one God that they knew. And you really got to look into that, like, considering the history of slavery. And this is another cultural context. I mean, it's just a known thing when you study slavery. Like when our people were first making houses of religion, even while they were slaves, they would make one house and divide that joint up into corners or whatnot, in sections. And they, like, different people of different cultures would take their corner and practice their faith in that corner and call it a day. So it wouldn't be it's a beautiful thing to see all those cultures in one place, if you ask me. If I can see Arabic and Hebrew on the pews, to me that's even a more beautiful thing than just seeing Hebrew on the pews if it's there. They're just seeing people coming together in whatever way they can to keep their culture alive and to worship God in the way that they want to, but they're still worshiping God together. Like, that's a beautiful picture to me. But again, that's taking it from a scholastic standpoint just to a cultural standpoint.
And then, like, we got to remember how it, like, are you familiar off the top of your head how many years it took them to build the whole church more?
Yo.
Right. See what I'm saying?
Like they said, my man was talking for 44 years about building the church, about building the brick one, not just the wood, but you know what I'm saying?
And so once again, when you go do the joint, you see like it's built, they're building and adding on to it at different times.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where like you can almost tell the different time periods, because one time period, the crosses that you see on one of them are Ethiopian crosses. And then at another time period, you see the standard Christian cross, right? It's just showing you the continuity of what we're talking about. This thing is happening over long periods of time. Mm-hmm. So now you see a growth and a change of people and a different influx of various people coming through there. You know, all of these things become very, very, very pertinent to the conversation, just as it pertains to what we're looking at and what we see on there.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, if I'm just stuck on looking for Hebrew, etc., I might miss out on a whole nother story. So Anonymous just talked about the Ethiopian crosses that are there, right? That's something that gets looked over a lot in the conversation. But when you see someone like Dr. Ephraim Isaac talking about, he sees that Ge'ez letters on the pews. When you look at the concept of potentially there being Ge'ez letters and then there also being Ethiopic crosses or whatnot, well, now you're starting to scratch your head and be like, wow, is there a connection here? And if so, how would there be an Ethiopic connection with this? Like, so you have to ask more questions. Like, is this part of the East African side of the slave trade, or were there Ethiopic peoples in West Africa that still had a tradition going away, etc.? A lot of questions you got to ask and answer. My man came off mute just to go.
So, I mean, it's interesting. I actually the crosses. It's the first time I'm hearing about the crosses. I actually didn't know about that. That is very interesting. Yeah.
And that's the other thing I keep saying to people. Like, you got to take the tour, or at least talk to somebody who took the tour.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of
talk. Hold on, not to cut you. Hold on, y'all got to hear this. Like, so when Anonymous just told me about it, right? Like, and it changed my whole. Like, he's telling me about under the church, right? And it's a trip. Like, my skin starts to crawl. Like, I feel like I'm there. Like my DNA singing to me about memories of being chained up or whatnot. Like, I'm going through a whole experience or whatnot. And when he's telling me about it, that's why I'm like, yo, just go. Man, I can't wait to go check that place out, man.
Like, just the story alone of how they built the foundation of the church. Imagine slaves working on a plantation. They're doing whatever they're supposed to do. And like, it's this whole story about how they kind of basically getting passes to go from the plantation to this area. And they're bringing this Georgia red brick. And so that's what the foundation is actually built on, these red Georgia brick clay, right? And it's solid. It's just this solid mound. But then, you know, obviously they sure it up and everything else with actual cement. But that is, the legend has it. Now, you know, we can't really say for sure paperwork wise what was going on. But, you know, the legend is that this underneath the bottom is where the slaves would hide out for the Underground Railroad. And it makes sense because they're actual holes in the floor of the basement, right? In the Bakongo symbol that Moore is talking about. Like, all of these things are fascinating, man. Like,
what did they tell you about the holes in the floor, though? They told you they had a
So the way that they avoided people finding the slaves is they would say, well, no, we put the holes in the floor because it was Georgia pine, and Georgia pine needs to breathe. And so that was that, like, that was how they would avoid detection. And just those small nuances, those type of things, like, I'm sorry, like that's not made up. Like, those things are the type of things that get passed on, and it speaks to truth. It brings life to what was really going on in this place. And just the entire story is amazing. The history of it. And you owe it to yourself to go and get the history and study it, because it's so many small little pieces of nuance that even I might have missed that somebody else will pick up on. And we can take all of that and put it together and come up, because like Abu said, that Ethiopian cross thing, like that blew my mind in itself. And just the craftsmanship, just all of it, the entire situation it's a real good situation. It's a real good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't even imagine what it was like for you, Anonymous, because like I'm saying, I'm just hearing you tell me about it, and it's like making me go through stuff. I'm like, I can't imagine what it's like for you to walk through it. You know what I'm saying? Like to hear my voice echo in the church you talking about has the crazy acoustics and all them kind of, you know what I'm saying? All that, the little details.
Right.
Hear the wood creaking underneath my feet when I'm going up the stairs and whatnot. All that.
Facts.
My man put his hands on the pews. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you get to sit on them. You sit there like the whole joint. It's in the way that they set it up. So you start off in the sanctuary, you go up to the pews, and then you go back down to the basement. And just the entire situation it's a real spiritual thing. It's a real solid. It's a good time, but it's also you get chill bumps thinking about what these people had to go through to get this church there, and then what everybody else had to go through to preserve the legacy up until this point.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things become very necessary to take into account when you are trying to put together what those pews say. And that's that's where kind of I leave it at. I know other people have family ties to that, so I'm not trying to negate the actual family ties. I'm just saying, like, let's bring it all out. Let's talk about it, and let's explore this thing from a true scholastic perspective. See what we find. Let's see what we get.
And on a cultural level, I completely respect that part of the family story is the cursive Hebrew, because that's part of what Anonymous was able to let us know with his tour, that his tour guide told him cursive Hebrew, a potentially Arabic trade language, all that.
Right. He's saying all of it. That was the crazy thing. Like, I got the guy on record. He's not just saying it's only Hebrew, or he's telling you it's multiples. He's actually saying, they would have came there really dealing a lot with Arabic. This is what he's saying, but they're also dealing with Hebrew, and they're dealing with patois. And he said it's like this trade language. This is,
There's an interesting point to be made on the timing or the chronology. So if you went in August of 2019, that would be after the website started saying that Arabic is on the pews. And there's a number of people who interpret the website stating that as being a rejection of the claim that there's Hebrew on the pews. But if even after the website changed, they're telling you on the tour, they're still affirming the presence of Hebrew, that should speak to the fact that stating on the website that Arabic appears on the pews is not in itself a denial of Hebrew appearing on the pews.
Right. And, and this is, and he was very clear to say, like, they're dealing with multiple languages at the time. He literally says the word trade language, but he goes deeper, and he's talking about, like, they're using this to tell stories to each other, and write books. Like, he's explaining how they were, they had a whole culture, a whole way of communicating, and because this is what he was studying. Like, he was working on his master's in African studies, and he was breaking it all down. And so, I'm picking his brain. Like, I'm asking him every question I could think. And he was just real cool. So he broke it all down. And so, and I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't aware when I went, I wasn't aware that there was a controversy of the languages on there. So I'm kind of glad that I wasn't, because I just went from a pure standpoint, like just a pure standpoint of just wanting to see it, wanting to see history, expecting to see Hebrew though, because I had heard about it. But then when you get there and you know what Hebrew looks like, you're like, okay, this is deeper than that. So, but that was a great point, Abu.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also gonna make this point. So Abu made a great point. So if Pastor Kelly has pictures of all the pews or whatnot, and all the panels or whatnot, there is a great service that can be done for those that are concerned about preserving any Hebrew legacy that's part of the oral tradition of the church or whatnot, in the sense to where, just like Abu has gone to multiple people that speak Arabic and has investigated the case for Arabic on the pews, you can still investigate the case for Hebrew on the pews for posterity's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Not just for like proving is there Hebrew on the pews or whatnot, but like if you're concerned about keeping the oral tradition alive and not having it get drowned out, etc., then that's the best way you do it. You prove it, because that way it becomes a marketable thing for the church. Because again, like they're not saying there's no Hebrew on the pews, like Abu and Anonymous are pointing out. They're still telling you, no, there's Hebrew on the pews when you go on the tour, or at least they were in 2019.
I was gonna say, yeah, that was 2019. I don't know now. So
yeah, they might be switching it up now. But if they've switched it up, this is definitely how you get them to rethink the whole thing, because as just a tourist attraction, fam, I'm gonna advertise what sell it, what I can make money off of, right? So if I can prove, like, so real talk, like if I can prove that there's Arabic on the pews, or I can point to there being Arabic on the pews, I might get a couple extra Muslims coming on the tour, you know what I'm saying, or etc. So same thing with Hebrew. Like if I know that there's Hebrew there, I'm gonna say that. If I don't know, I might not say it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It just is like I know that's a Bakongo symbol. I'm gonna say that's a Bakongo symbol. Boom. I know there's 9 patch on the ceiling. There's 9 patch on the ceiling. You know what I'm saying? It just becomes, at one point it becomes a marketing thing. It might not be anything more. It might be something more. Don't know. Can't call it. But the best way to keep the oral tradition alive is to give it some substance to stand on.
Also, if let's say all the pictures, if all the pews were public and available online, you'd get a larger number of eyeballs looking at them and proposing readings, and the discussion would advance faster if a larger number of people were discussing it.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised who would get curious. I mean, look at people like when Jeffrey Kahn, he saw it, he was like, oh, what's going on? When did this happen? Who wrote this? He got instantly curious. Instantly curious. Like the other person, Danny, whatever his name was, I forgot his name. But he was like, yeah, I'm not certain, but let me show this to the rest of my colleagues and see what they think. Mm-hmm. Scholars like to answer questions. They don't run from like that's their job, is to answer the hard questions.
And even separate from scholars, like there was a period where certain people were saying, all right, the discussion is done, no more talk, that's it, it's finished. Mm-hmm. And then when Berean had me on his show and it sort of generated new excitement in the subject, that's what brought Benaiah into it to propose a reading for the pews. Mm-hmm. And as I've said before, whatever one thinks of his precise interpretations or conclusions, he has to be given credit for sort of changing the nature of the debate, right? Because he ushered in a sort of a paradigm shift,
Big
by proposing a reading.
I was gonna say that's a solid brother, man.
Yeah, solid dude, real humble dude. I like Benaiah.
Yeah, he definitely seems like a real gentleman, an authentic gentleman. I've said that on Berean's channel as well.
Agreed, 100%. So he's someone who I know would appreciate having access to all the different pictures of pews, etc., whatnot.
Yeah, he said so on your show. I remember when you had that discussion with him. He said that to date, no one has, put forth and cataloged, each of the pews. So it would be helpful to have that, to have the pictures of all the pews.
Mm-hmm.
and let people then, a sort of natural process of cataloging would happen as people would discuss it. They would start referring to different pews in specific ways, and sort of de facto cataloging would happen.
I was thinking that too, like row 1, pew 2, side,
left
side, right side, because
like it's like a papyrus or a tablet. You know what it is?
Yeah. Because like even when I went, you're on the tour, and then they're very particular and meticulous about how you take these pictures. Like you have to either be in the picture or things like that, and because they really don't want you kind of taking the pictures, posting them online, and kind of giving people a chance to paint a picture, get a real understanding of how to move through the church, kind of to protect them, because it is let's be honest, people kind of shooting up historical black churches.
Exactly.
So they're doing their best to kind of protect from that perspective. But if we did have something where we could look at them all in some way, shape, or form, because
archive.
Yeah, like even when I went, I wasn't able to, because you just moving kind of fast through it. I wasn't even able to catalog which pew was this and what. I just made sure I got them straight up and down, as clear as possible. With my hand pointing to it, or with me and my wife in it, or something like that. So that way we didn't. So, okay, this is a great question, Gabar, and I don't know the answer to it. He says, but just to finish his statement, then I'll answer his question. I wasn't even able to catalog it the way I would have liked to. So if the brother Pastor Kelly has it, cool. Let's let us take a look at it if we can. But hopefully we can maybe reach out to them and figure out a way, if it's possible, to get it cataloged so we can get some more eyeballs on it. But to answer Brother Gabar's question, he said, why does the tour only allow a portion of the pews to be viewed in detail? I don't know. To be honest, I have no clue. I thought maybe the stairwell on the other side maybe wasn't capable of holding that much foot traffic, maybe, but I've since come to learn that that's probably not the case. So I don't know. I know I hear the same story from everybody, and I experience it for myself. They only let you go on one side.
Yeah, so we would have to get access and get permission from the church to find out what's going on with the other side, or what they say about that, and why they don't let people go up there. It might just be just a hazard concept or a liability concept, because I know this, man. I'm not trying to have nobody slip and fall and have me pay for that joint.
Right.
For the rest of my life.
Yeah, I don't know.
You got to sell the churches to pay for that joint.
But I think now that I know everybody is kind of more interested in it, I think I'm just gonna call down there and figure out what we can work out. See if we can get access to it, get in there, and we do have the other brothers that got direct access to it too. So we can figure it out, get in there, and come in there now with the real perspective of this is what we're trying to do. I want to see it all and have a conversation at this point.
Yeah, because it's a national treasure, and what I like about it, there should be something for almost everybody to deal with in this. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian or a Catholic or a Jew or an Israelite or a Muslim or whatever, like there's something for everybody in this project.
Even if there's, like, as you pointed out, separate from sort of like Israelite debates or something like that, there should be an interest in what's on the pews. Like, for example, hypothetically speaking, let's say there's a pew that has a clear writing in a non-Semitic language and a non-Semitic script. Let's say it's a West African language that's written in the Latin script. It would still be worthwhile to know what that says, and to have that recorded somewhere, historically.
Yeah, if nothing else, you can be like, okay, we know that the Fulani were here and wrote this, and that the Yoruba were here and wrote this, that the Igbo were here and wrote this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Which many people are going to find interesting,
Yeah.
I just think in itself, the history of the diaspora, once you start to dig into it, for those that really dig history, you can't help but be enamored and want to go deeper and deeper and understand it, because it's telling this story of all types of different cultures. Like once me and Moore really start getting into the DNA and starting to understand like it's much deeper than just West Africa, it opened up to all of this other conversations of, you know, exploring the Moors, exploring Spain, exploring East Africa, exploring everything in the connections to all of this. That's all I got.
Oh yeah, someone in the chat says it's mind blowing. It 100% is mind blowing.
Yeah, it is, bro.
Like what blew my mind, sis, was when Anonymous told me about the Ethiopian crosses, and then I heard Ephraim Isaac talking about Ge'ez on the pews. I was like, okay, if we're talking like not only that, like so I was blessed enough to have conversations recently with Cohen Hamadisha, a Lemba tribesman who was a Cohen and rabbi over there. He let me know that he believed that there were slaves, Lembas, taken on slave ships to America in the transatlantic slave trade. And I heard him at first, and I kind of just brushed it off. But then I was like, no, let me look into this. And then I found out that from East African ports, over 500,000 people were taken.
Right.
Almost 6% of the slaves came from over there. And I was like, oh wow. So like I'm looking at that, and then I was looking at the Ethiopian cross, and then the Ge'ez concept. I was like, oh wow, that's a big story. Because like at first my mind was blown just understanding there was a triangular slave trade in East Africa that no one knew about, with France and with Portugal, Spain and other people. Even the United States ended up taking slaves from Mozambique on American ships, right? But we're not taught about that in school. So understanding that concept that there's an East African slave trade in the transatlantic slave trade, finding out that there's Ge'ez on potentially Ge'ez on the pews, that one scholar is saying he thinks that there's Ge'ez letters there. The concept of the Ethiopic cross, and then the concept of like 9 patch of potential codes in the church. I'm like, wait a minute, whoa. There's a lot of layers to this onion. Let's go slow and peel it back one by one.
Facts. I feel like Abu be wanting to say stuff, and then we be cutting him off.
Oh no! I'm just listening to you, gentlemen. I mean, the truth be told, I don't have as much to say when we sort of are not on the linguistic subject. So that's why, and I spoke quite a bit earlier, so it's better to let others speak.
You did break it down a lot. You did.
No, for sure.
You know, I appreciate this conversation, right? And hopefully this can start to happen more. We see where it go.
Yeah, we will definitely have the brother Boo on one more time, at least one more time, hopefully more. But we're definitely gonna have him come back and give a lengthy breakdown on the Lashawan Kadash and his interaction with Stutch.
I would enjoy that immensely.
Now you starting trouble, man.
I got to do it, man, because like you know what I'm saying. Like I've been listening to Abu talk about the Lashawan Kadash for a minute. We were talking earlier. He's like he's been doing it over 20 years. I'm like, we definitely got to wrap on that. Definitely. I think there's a lot of good questions on both ways on the topic. And I think it's a good scholastic topic to deal with.
I agree.
It's not one that should be ran from.
And I will say this as it pertains to, and you know, this kind of, I don't know if it really pertains to Abu, but at some point in time, we got to just understand that we just got different dialects in the community. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, some of us might not deal with the Lashawan Kodesh, right? That's still a dialect, so I ain't finna knock them for it. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean it's like Arabic, fam. Like so, like if you're Moroccan, you literally cannot get understood anywhere else in the Arabic speaking world. They look at you like, huh? What'd you just say?
I'm gonna be honest with you, bro, just for a second. Hey, GT, I promise you faithful to God, bro. I promise you. You move like him. Move like him, dude. And it is what it is. Take it for what it's worth. I didn't misrepresent nothing you said, bro. I didn't even come at you. Right? Yep, definitely. because that's the only person over there that has that type of him and one other person have that type of demeanor towards me for no reason, right? I know who that is. I know what that is. That like how Abu like how Abu put together, his methodology with the cat situation. It's the same methodology. That dude is if he not, then he listens to Faithful to God a lot. Like he moves like him. Look, bro, I didn't misrepresent nothing. I actually asked you in the chat to let me listen to Abu. But you kept asking questions. I gave you articles to look, still wasn't good enough, right? Chill out, man. I didn't misrepresent you. I don't got no issue with you. If you want the smoke, you can get the debate. I don't see you really trying to do that though. I think you just want to kind of troll a little bit. So you got your attention now. Back to Abu. Hey, I would love to get the information that you have on the Arabic writing and things that are in Sicily.
Yeah, I'll try to find one. I know in terms of what's published, I wrote about it on Facebook recently. I know John Wansbrough had an interesting article about a document from Sicily, and recently on Facebook, I posted. I can look for it now and throw the link in the chat or something like that if I'm able to put links in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just contact me on Facebook and I can share it with you there.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, some of it is certainly quite public.
Okay. Yeah, I would love because I'm putting together something where I can understand the methodology of this. I want to paint a picture of this, and I want to be able to speak to this and give examples of how this would work and what it would look like. And so yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so with that, I'm gonna let everyone give their closing statements because we're running up on 3 hours, family. And it's late for me, so I know it's late for y'all. Both of y'all on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, it's quite late over here.
So Anonymous, if you want to go ahead and close out, man, go ahead.
And yeah, thanks for letting me come on and rap with the brother. It's great to finally speak to you, Abu. Hopefully we can have more conversations. I hope that the brother said I was disrespectful in the chat. I hope you don't feel like I was disrespectful to you. I don't think I was.
Not in the least. I wasn't offended by anything that I heard coming my way.
Cool. Awesome.
No, brother GT, trust me, when Anonymous wants you to know he's being disrespectful, you will definitely understand he's being disrespectful. I didn't see him being disrespectful with you, fam.
Be very won't even be a question, right? So, but with that being said, though, I enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, we can have more conversations like this. Peace and love to the rest of the family. More, you know what it is. All praise to the Most High. To the brother Sal, thank you for letting us utilize the platform as always. It's nothing but love. And to the family, I know what it is. Let's keep pushing. So
yes, sir. I will get at you, man.
Have a great night. And thanks a lot, Abu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, go ahead, Abu.
Oh, I don't have any significant closing statements. Just I enjoyed the conversation, and I certainly look forward to whether discussing this topic again or discussing Lashman Kodash or any other subject. I certainly would very much enjoy coming on again, if possible.
Yeah, I look forward to having you on again and having these discussions. And I appreciate your contributions, your scholastic contributions to discussions, and the thoughtfulness in which you bring your arguments. I know some people view you as an adversary, and will always view you adversarially.
Yes, and I think that's a misunderstanding. I think because the spectrum, and it's the same thing that Israelites face, because the spectrum on what's called the UA side, and again, that's a very ill-defined term, or at least I'm not sure how to define UA, but whatever the case, within that spectrum, you have so many different people, and so there is a tendency to sort of see each person as the same as the other, and so if one was harsher than another, those who are less harsh are nonetheless perceived to have those the same intentions. But the reality is that if we're going to be lumped together, they're lumping together a very diverse group. I remember I had a brief correspondence with Dante Fortson about that, if you're going to include, for example, myself or Nefertiti, for example, within this spectrum of UA, you have a situation where it's like extremely diverse, not only in terms of demeanor, but even ideologically. You know, you have Calvinists, anti-Calvinists, and Seventh-day Adventists, and Roman Catholics, and you know, at a certain point, it's and I don't think everybody defines it the same way. Like I'm sure there are certain gentlemen who would not define it in a way that includes me, for example. You know, who define themselves that way, and so on. Whatever the case. But yes, I think that what happens is that I sort of went off the rails, but yeah, on both sides, there's a tendency to perceive hostility even when it's not there, just because so many of the discussions are acrimonious.
Yeah. Even if people would perceive it to be an adversary, I would tell people not to perceive it to be a malicious adversary. I'd like, so me and Anonymous came from a league to where, or from previous platforms, etc., to where we would have people running streams on us for weeks on end, hours on end. You know what I'm saying? Running your name through the mud, calling you every name in the book, trying to get you out of your character, whatnot, doing everything but giving you a scholastic argument based for what you're saying. And so, going from that to dealing with people like you it's nothing. I mean, a boo is not the devil incarnate. What a boo will help you do is he will help you sharpen your argument if you have one. And that's actually something that on a steel sharpening steel kind of a thing. Like, I want my arguments to be the best. So I actually appreciate people like Abu for putting forth thoughtful arguments. Because if I'm going to sit down in a chess game with a boo, I'm not just going to rush through my movements. I'm going to really think about every move I play. And that makes me a better player, not a worse player. At the end of the day, that's not a bad thing. So, thank you for what you do for the community, Abu. I personally appreciate the level of arguments that you bring, and the forthrightness in which you deal with the arguments. Like you were able to say real plainly, no, I didn't consider this. No, I didn't consider that. You're not trying to hide anything. You're not trying to paint over anything, gloss over anything. You're real upfront, and I appreciate that about you. Not only that, again, I can't state this enough. I gained an enormous amount of respect for you when I heard you defending the sovereignty of God when it comes to who is and is not saved. Because as my mother always told me growing up, man, I have neither a heaven nor a hell to put you in. And I'd be surprised when people keep trying to put us in hell or heaven. I'm like, yo, calm down. Be easy. Let's worry about the plank in our own eyes right quick. So yeah, I appreciate you for that. Yeah, and like I said, we will definitely have you on again and deal with the Lashwan Kadash and probably a whole host of other topics, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious to see how you see certain things, being that they've probably lumped you up with other people in terms of their belief system and not really heard you say what you believe from your own mouth. But with that, family, I appreciate you for your time. I appreciate you for hanging out with us. And, I hope you had some edification from this conversation. So let us know down below. And Abu, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter under the name Abu Khamr, and then also, unfortunately, the name is a bit long, but on Facebook is Abdel Masih Al Manhatani. But if you go to my Twitter account, there'll be links to my YouTube and Facebook accounts where I can be reached. So basically, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
All right. So with that, family, we are signing off. And I'm saying peace and love.
God bless.